Welcome to Secrets of History at Night. Here, we journey into the past to help you drift off peacefully and productively. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button, because by the end of this lecture, you'll be sound asleep. Close your eyes. The story is about to begin. France is, without a doubt, a nation of unparalleled significance. While Europe boasts many formidable powers, it is France that has, over centuries, shaped the destinies of entire continents. Its history is not merely a chronicle of events, it is a testament to ideas, revolutions, culture, and art that have irrevocably altered the world. Why is France so pivotal in global history? Consider, for a start, that the crucial junctures in Europe's development were often decided on French soil. Here, the Great French Revolution erupted, revolutionizing not only France, but humanity's very concept of liberty, equality, and human rights. Here, Napoleon was born, a figure who, for a brief period, compelled all of Europe to adhere to French laws and permanently redrew its political map. Here, culture, art, and philosophy flourished, inspiring minds across the globe. From Enlightenment Paris, home to Voltaire and Rousseau, to the Impressionists and existentialists of the 20th century, France has gifted the world many elements we now consider fundamental to modern society. These include its legal system, the foundations of its civil code, secular education, and the principles of democracy that have influenced dozens of nations. So why is France referred to as the cultural heart of Europe? The answer is straightforward and evident. For centuries, this nation has drawn the most brilliant creators, artists, writers, philosophers, and thinkers of their time. Paris became the emblem of global culture, fashion, and art. It was here that Leonardo da Vinci and Pablo Picasso created, alongside Coco Chanel, Yves Saint Laurent, Victor Hugo, and Albert Camus. For centuries, the French language served as the international tongue of diplomacy, science, and art, while French literature inspired generations of writers and poets worldwide. People from every corner of the globe flocked to Paris and other French cities to immerse themselves in this extraordinary cultural atmosphere. France has been and continues to be a veritable mirror of European civilization. Through its history, we can trace the transformations of the entire world, from antiquity and barbarian invasions to the present day, with its global challenges and the quest for a new identity. It is for precisely this reason that today we embark on an extensive and captivating expedition to thoroughly and systematically explore the complete history of France, a nation indispensable to understanding the trajectory of Europe and all of humanity. The history of France extends far back into antiquity, reaching depths far beyond what typically comes to mind when this country is mentioned. Long before cities and fortresses rose, and even before the advent of the first kings and knights, the territory of modern-day France was inhabited by people whose world was utterly dissimilar to our own. Yet it was they who laid the groundwork for all that was to follow. Humanity's initial encounter with settled life in the region of present-day France commenced long before our species emerged, over 1 million years ago. In that era, the lands now blanketed by fields and vineyards were populated by prehistoric humans, such as Homo erectus and later Neanderthals. These ancient European inhabitants sustained themselves through hunting and gathering, gradually adapting to the harsh conditions of the Ice Age and evolving climate. Around 40,000 years ago, new people arrived in Europe, including France, the Cro-Magnons. These were the first representatives of our own species, Homo sapiens, fully modern humans who would eventually dominate the continent. Cro-Magnons were not only physically similar to contemporary humans, but also possessed advanced capacities for creativity and abstract thought. They crafted tools and weapons of remarkable precision and artistry. Knives, scrapers, spears, and arrowheads adorned with intricate patterns and symbols. Particularly significant and astonishing traces of these early Europeans are found in the Dordogne region of southwestern France. It was here that the renowned Cro-Magnon cave, which lent its name to this ancient culture, was discovered. In 1868, French geologist Louis Lartigue unearthed ancient human remains here, dating back over 30,000 years. These remains astounded scientists. The Cro-Magnons were tall, with the average male height reaching 180 centimeters, robust, with well-developed musculature, and powerful skeletons adapted to life during the harsh Ice Age. However, modern-day France gained its greatest renown for the unique cave paintings created by the Cro-Magnons approximately 20,000 years ago. The Lascaux Caves, discovered in 1940 by 4 French teenagers, stand as the most impressive and celebrated testament to prehistoric art. Their walls are covered with hundreds of vibrant and extraordinarily realistic depictions of animals: deer, aurochs, bison, rhinoceroses, and horses. Some animals are shown in motion, indicating the artist's keen observation of wildlife behavior. It is noteworthy that the ancient artists utilized natural materials like ochre, charcoal, and animal fat, achieving remarkable color permanence that has preserved their freshness and vibrancy even after millennia. The precise purpose of these paintings remains an enigma. Archaeologists surmise that these depictions may have been integral to hunting rituals and magical ceremonies intended to ensure successful game acquisition. This is indirectly supported by the fact that many animal depictions within the caves are shown pierced by symbolic arrows and spears. Another remarkable discovery was the Chauvet Cave, unearthed in 1994 in southern France. Its walls are adorned with the oldest known cave paintings in Europe, created approximately 30,000 years ago. In addition to animals, enigmatic symbolic imagery, and even handprints of prehistoric humans were found. Scientists were struck not only by the antiquity of the find, but also by the artistic merit of these depictions. Their lines are clear, the compositions are thoughtful, and the subjects are filled with expression. Beyond their artistic creations, the Cro-Magnons left behind evidence of their daily lives and beliefs. In certain locations, the earliest examples of ornaments and jewelry have been discovered. Necklaces made from shells, bone, and animal teeth. These adornments served not only an aesthetic purpose, but also a symbolic one, intended to protect their wearers from malevolent spirits and misfortune. Another significant aspect of Cro-Magnon life was their ability to create musical instruments. France has yielded the oldest musical instruments in Europe, flutes crafted from mammoth bone or bird bones. This suggests that music held an important place in the lives of ancient peoples, fostering community cohesion, and possibly serving as part of spiritual rituals. The Cro-Magnons resided in small settlements, composed of lightweight structures covered with animal hides. Remains of such encampments have been found in the La Madeleine area of southern France, where numerous traces of hearths, animal bones, and tools have been uncovered. enabling scientists to reconstruct details of ancient daily life. After the ancient artists and hunter-gatherer Cro-Magnons faded from history, they were succeeded by new peoples who shaped a profoundly different world on the territory of future France. Around the first millennium before the Common Era, these lands became inhabited by the Celts, a people whose culture and way of life exerted a significant influence on the entire subsequent history of Europe. The Celts were numerous tribes who dispersed across much of Western and Central Europe. However, it was the territory of France, which they called Gaul, that became the primary center of their culture and civilization. The Gauls, as the Romans referred to the Celts in present-day France, established a society that became a paradigm of freedom, strength, and profound religiosity. Celtic society was organized in a notably complex manner, comprising numerous tribes, each with its own chieftain and territory. These tribes could form alliances with one another, or conversely engage in fierce warfare. A distinct social structure was evident within Gallic society. At its apex resided the aristocracy, the nobility, and the chieftains, who wielded considerable power. Below them were the free commoners, warriors, and artisans, who formed the backbone of society. Priests, the renowned Druids, also played a unique role. The Druids were not merely religious officials. They were the very heart and soul of the Celtic world. It was the Druids who served as judges, healers, mentors, and custodians of the people's history and knowledge. They were among the few who could read and write in their own secret language. However, they preferred to preserve all their knowledge orally, transmitting wisdom only to select disciples. Consequently, many of the Druids' secrets remain a mystery to scholars to this day. According to ancient accounts, a Druid's training lasted over 20 years. During this time, they memorized thousands of verses and legends, studied natural phenomena, astronomy and philosophy, and mastered the secrets of medicinal herbs and plants. Their authority among the Celts was so immense that even chieftains and kings could not defy their will. Celtic religion was intrinsically linked to nature. The Gauls worshipped numerous deities who symbolized the forces of nature and the elements. The principal deity was Taranis, the god of thunder, analogous to the Greek Zeus or the Norse Thor. They also revered Isis, the patron of fertility, a mother goddess who presided over the earth and harvest, and the war god Tutates. Trees were considered sacred, particularly oaks, near which the Druids performed their most important rituals. It was believed that oaks possessed a magical power that connected the world of the living with the world of spirits. Therefore, many Celtic sanctuaries were located within oak groves, where ordinary people were forbidden to enter without the Druids' permission. Within these sanctuaries, the most vital ceremonies were conducted, including sacrifices. Notably, contrary to popular stereotypes, human sacrifices were extremely rare occurrences, taking place only during particularly critical moments. The Celts placed great importance on the afterlife, believing that the souls of the deceased were reborn. They believed in reincarnation and considered death merely a transition to another realm. This belief explained their fearless bravery in battle. The Celts did not fear death, confident in their ability to be born again and again. Celtic culture was celebrated not only for its spiritual life, but also for the craftsmanship of its artisans and warriors. Their metalworking skills reached an extraordinary level, Gallic blacksmiths and armorers produced exquisite and durable swords, spears, war chariots, shields, and helmets, adorned with intricate ornamentation. These artifacts impressed contemporaries with their beauty and combat effectiveness, and the Romans later adopted many of the Celts' technological advancements. Celtic jewelry held a special place. Their ornaments, bracelets, necklaces, and rings were often fashioned from gold and bronze, embellished with depictions of animals and mythological creatures. One of the most recognizable Celtic symbols was the so-called torque, a massive neck ring signifying nobility and valor. It was worn by the most distinguished warriors and tribal chieftains, accentuating their elevated status. The attire of the Gauls was vibrant and expressive. Men wore tunics and trousers, which the Romans later termed Gallic breeches, as well as colorful cloaks. Women adorned their garments with embroidery and flowers, sported elaborate hairstyles, and wore jewelry. Celtic music and poetry also occupied a central position in society. Poets and bards enjoyed immense respect, their creations considered a divine gift. Bards accompanied all significant societal events, extolling the deeds of heroes, praising the gods, and inspiring warriors before battles. Their music resounded at feasts and religious ceremonies, cultivating an atmosphere of unity and spiritual upliftment. Despite the might and richness of their culture, the Celts could not indefinitely maintain their independence. Their freedom-loving spirit clashed with the formidable military apparatus of the Roman Empire. Celtic Gaul, with its liberty-cherishing and warlike tribes, could not remain detached from the grand narrative unfolding across Europe in the first century before the Common Era. In 58 BCE, the destiny of Gaul irrevocably shifted. Legions of the Roman Republic, led by the ambitious and skilled commander Gaius Julius Caesar, entered its territories. By this time, Rome had already established itself as a formidable power, dominating much of the Mediterranean world. Gaul remained one of the few regions in Western Europe yet to be subjugated by the Romans. In the eyes of the Romans, the Gauls were considered barbarians, warlike, unpredictable, and dangerous. However, Gaul was rich in natural resources, fertile lands, gold, and iron. The conquest of these territories promised not only glory and wealth, but also the security of Rome's northern frontiers. In 58 BCE, Gaius Julius Caesar, who had become governor of the province of Narbonese Gaul, modern-day southern France, resolved to commence a campaign to conquer all Gallic tribes. Thus began the renowned Gallic Wars, which lasted nearly 8 years and were meticulously documented by Caesar himself in his famous commentaries on the Gallic War. The Gallic Wars immediately highlighted the disparity between Roman and Gallic military tactics. The Gauls were lauded for their personal bravery and prowess in single combat, but they struggled in large-scale engagements and were prone to emotional responses, whereas the Romans distinguished themselves through strict discipline, cohesion, and meticulous organization. Caesar skillfully leveraged the strengths of the Roman legions, their mobility, engineering capabilities, tactical superiority, and discipline. He expertly employed the strategy of divide and conquer, pitting various Gallic tribes against each other and forging alliances with some against others. However, the Gauls were not prepared to surrender without a fight. The initial years of the war were marked by fierce battles and tenacious resistance. In 58 BCE, the first major confrontation occurred with the Germanic tribes of the Helvetii and the Suebi, who were attempting to migrate through Gaul. Caesar achieved a decisive victory, asserting his military dominance over the territory. One of the most significant events of the Gallic Wars was the battle against the Germanic chieftain Ariovistus, who sought to conquer a portion of Gaul. This victory not only rendered Caesar a hero in the eyes of the Romans, but also demonstrated the power and peril of Roman forces to the Gallic tribes. The most dramatic phase of the war was the uprising led by the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix in 52 BCE. This gifted young leader managed to unite the majority of the disparate Gallic tribes against their common enemy, forging, for the first time in a considerable period, a formidable alliance capable of effectively resisting Caesar. Vercingetorix possessed not only charisma and personal courage, but also brilliant military talents. Vercingetorix opted to eschew large-scale confrontations, aiming instead to weaken the Romans through harassing raids and blockades. However, the war culminated in the celebrated Siege of Alesia, the most significant engagement of the Gallic Wars. Caesar surrounded the Gallic stronghold with formidable fortifications and ditches, completely isolating Vercingetorix's forces within. When numerous Gallic tribes arrived to relieve the besieged, Caesar displayed extraordinary tactical genius, constructing a dual line of fortifications, one to maintain the siege of the city, and another to repel external assaults. After prolonged and arduous combat, the besieged, weakened by starvation, were compelled to surrender. Vercingetorix, in a bid to save his people from utter annihilation, voluntarily exited the city and laid down his arms before Caesar. The Gallic chieftain was dispatched to Rome, where he perished in prison several years later, his defeat signaling the end of Gallic independence. Having secured victory, Caesar became a hero of Rome, garnering immense wealth and renown. Gaul was transformed into a Roman province, ushering in an era of active Romanization. The Latin language, Roman laws, and culture rapidly permeated the entire territory, and Gallic civilization gradually became integrated into the vast Roman world. The Gallic War left an indelible mark not only on the history of France, but on European culture as a whole. Caesar's own commentaries on the war became a classic of ancient literature and a crucial historical source, providing insights into the intricacies of Gallic society and Roman military strategies. For modern France, the figure of Vercingetorix has become a symbol of national pride and independence. Monuments and artistic works have been dedicated to him, the most notable being the majestic statue erected on the site of the Battle of Alesia in the 19th century, commissioned by Napoleon III. The image of the proud Gallic leader confronting foreign invaders has become an integral part of the historical consciousness of the French people. Following Caesar's conquest of Gaul, a new era commenced, one that completely reshaped these lands and profoundly influenced the entire future history of France. This marked the epoch of Roman Gaul, a period when Gallic culture, previously deemed barbarian, rapidly began to adopt Roman customs, language, architecture, and ways of life. The Romans proved to be more than mere conquerors, seeking to subjugate and exploit conquered peoples. They were also bearers of a powerful civilization capable of integrating foreign traditions and forging a new, unique cultural milieu. Consequently, after the conquest, the process of active Romanization began in Gaul. In place of ancient Celtic settlements and fortifications, large and prosperous cities emerged, serving as strongholds of Roman influence. Among the most striking examples of Roman impact was the rise of Gallo-Roman cities, notable among which were Lugdunum, the present-day Lyon, Nemausus, now Nimes, Massilia, Marseille, Arausio, Orange, and Lutetia, the future Paris. These cities experienced rapid growth, becoming centers of trade, craftsmanship, and cultural life. They featured amphitheaters, baths, temples, and aqueducts, structures that continue to inspire awe with their architectural grandeur even today. Lugdunum, founded in 43 BCE, soon became the largest city in Gaul and its capital. The city was situated at the crossroads of vital trade routes, ensuring its rapid development and prosperity. Immense fairs were held here annually, drawing merchants from across the Roman world. The city was renowned not only for its commerce, but also for its cultural vibrancy, hosting theaters and schools of rhetoric where members of the Gallic elite studied. Nemausus, modern-day Nîmes, is celebrated for its impressive ancient Roman architectural monuments, most notably its colossal amphitheater and the Maison Carrée, one of the most well-preserved structures of the Roman world. These edifices bear testament to the city's affluence and prosperity, having been a significant trading hub in its time. Another celebrated city was Arausio, present-day Orange, famed for its colossal amphitheater and the magnificent triumphal arch erected in honor of Emperor Augustus's victories. The triumphal arch in Orange is still considered one of the finest examples of ancient Roman architecture in Europe. Roman Gaul also spurred the development of infrastructure that facilitated the region's prosperity. It was the Romans who constructed the renowned roads connecting major cities, ensuring safe passage for merchants, artisans, and armies. These roads were built with such exceptional quality that many sections remain in use today, nearly 2 millennia later. In addition to roads, the Romans were masters of aqueduct construction, building magnificent structures to supply cities with clean, potable water. The most famous is the Pont de Gare aqueduct near Nîmes, erected in the 1st century CE. Its astonishing design of massive stone arches continues to captivate tourists and engineers worldwide. The cultural landscape of Roman Gaul was rich and diverse. The Latin language spread everywhere, gradually displacing Celtic dialects and becoming the language of educated society. It is from Latin that French would later evolve, incorporating numerous elements from the earlier Gallic tongue. In matters of religion, Roman culture was open and tolerant. The Romans did not forbid the Gauls from worshiping their own gods. On the contrary, they often identified them with their own deities. For instance, the Gallic Tyrannus was equated with Jupiter and Isis with Mars or Mercury. This facilitated the creation of a shared religious culture where Gallic and Roman traditions were deeply intertwined. Over time, the inhabitants of Gaul fully embraced the Roman pantheon, with temples dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, and other deities constructed in every city. Concurrently, the economy flourished across Gaul. The Romans introduced innovative agricultural techniques, initiating widespread cultivation of vineyards and olive trees. The province of Aquitania, corresponding to modern southwestern France, became particularly renowned for supplying wine of exceptional quality to Roman elites. Roman Gaul produced numerous distinguished individuals, including the renowned philosopher and poet Ausonius, born in Bordeaux, celebrated for his literary works. He is recognized as a foundational figure in Gallo-Roman literature, exerting a significant influence on Western European culture as a whole. However, by the late 2nd and early 1st centuries AD, the Roman Empire began a gradual decline, grappling with internal crises and incursions from barbarian tribes. Gaul, as an integral part of this vast empire, did not escape these adversities. Invasions by Germanic peoples such as the Franks, Alemanni, and Visigoths commenced. Roman authority over the province progressively weakened, and by the 5th century, the territory of former Roman Gaul became a theater of intense warfare and conflict among various tribes. As the Roman Empire's power waned, and its territories could no longer withstand the pressure of numerous barbarian tribes, an era commenced that reshaped the entire continent of Europe, the epoch of the Great Migration of peoples. This period, spanning from the 5th to the 6th century, completely transformed the lands of Gaul, bestowing upon them a new name and new rulers who would irrevocably shape the future of France. Numerous Germanic tribes, including the Goths, Vandals, Burgundians, Alemanni, and most notably the Franks, surged into the former Roman province. It was the Franks who would play a pivotal role in establishing a new state on these lands. The Franks were a Germanic people who initially resided along the banks of the Rhine River. Their name originated from an ancient Germanic word signifying free or brave. These people were renowned for their valor and martial prowess, enduring harsh conditions, engaging in hunting, animal husbandry, and agriculture, and also launching raids against Roman territories. Gradually, the Franks began to infiltrate Gaul, capitalizing on the Romans' preoccupation with conflicts against other barbarian tribes and internal struggles. Unlike other migrating groups, the Franks did not merely seek plunder and destruction. They aimed to settle, claim fertile lands, establish their own communities, and assert their dominion. Slowly but surely, they consolidated their presence in Gaul, laying the groundwork for a new society. The first Frankish ruler to enter the historical record was Childeric I, who reigned in the mid-5th century. However, the true architect of the Frankish state, the individual who united numerous fragmented tribes into a singular political force, was his son, Clovis I. Clovis ascended to the throne in 481 as a mere youth, but swiftly demonstrated himself to be a decisive and talented leader. He initiated a policy of aggressive expansion of Frankish territories, subjugating numerous neighboring Germanic and Gallo-Roman tribes. By the close of the 5th century, a significant portion of northern and central Gaul had fallen under his control. A pivotal event during Clovis's reign was his conversion to Christianity. In 496, following his victory at the Battle of Tolbiac against the Alemanni, Clovis was baptized by Bishop Remigius in the city of Reims. This event marked a turning point in the history of France, as it was the first instance of a Germanic ruler embracing Catholic rather than Arian Christianity. Consequently, Clovis secured the support of the powerful Gallo-Roman Christian Church, which viewed him as its protector and ally. Clovis's baptism and that of his retinue symbolized the unification of the Franks and the Gallo-Roman populace, initiating the formation of the French people. This momentous event garnered Clovis the backing of the clergy, which subsequently facilitated the consolidation and expansion of his authority. The era of the Merovingian dynasty, named after the legendary Frankish ancestor Merovech, commenced with Clovis. This was the first Frankish royal dynasty, ruling over Gaul for nearly 300 years, from the 5th to the 7th century. Under the Merovingians, Gaul transformed into the Frankish kingdom. The Franks gradually intermingled with the local population, adopting the Latin language, culture, and traditions, while simultaneously retaining many of their Germanic customs. Frankish society was structured upon a strict hierarchy. The king held absolute power, but was heavily reliant on the support of the local nobility and his warrior retinue. A distinctive characteristic of Merovingian rule was the tradition of dividing the kingdom among heirs, which frequently led to bloody internecine conflicts. These constant partitions and rivalries weakened the state, rendering it vulnerable to external threats and internal unrest. This tendency even contributed to the later appellation of the last Merovingians as the do-nothing kings, Arwas fainéants, as actual power gradually devolved to their chief ministers, the mayors of the palace. Nevertheless, despite these internal struggles, the Merovingian period represented a crucial stage in the formation of European civilization. During this era, art flourished, particularly in goldsmithing, and magnificent manuscripts adorned with gold and precious stones were created. Architecture advanced, and the first monasteries and churches emerged, becoming centers of culture and learning. One of the most significant legal documents of this period was the Salic Law, a compilation of Frankish laws commissioned by Clovis. This decree regulated nearly all aspects of life, from criminal penalties to rules of land inheritance, laying the foundation for France's future legal system and influencing European jurisprudence. It was during the Merovingian epoch that the intensive construction of monasteries began in France, such as the Abbey of Saint-Denis, founded in the 6th century, which became the principal burial site for French monarchs. Following a prolonged period of internal strife and feuds, the Merovingian authority began to wane, yielding to a new political force destined to irrevocably alter the face of France and all of Europe. This power was the Carolingian dynasty, originating from the mayors of the palace, the chief court officials of the Frankish kingdom, who gradually assumed full authority from the increasingly ineffective Merovingian kings. The pivotal moment arrived with the accession of Pepin the Short, the first officially recognized king of the Carolingian dynasty. In the mid-8th century, Pepin secured the support of the Pope of Rome, who officially validated his claim to the royal throne. This was an exceptionally significant event, as it marked the first time in Western medieval history that the Pope asserted the prerogative to determine who was worthy of kingship. In 751, Pepin was crowned and formally proclaimed King of the Franks, while the last Merovingian king was relegated to a monastery. Thus began the Carolingian era, whose influence extended far beyond the borders of France. However, the true zenith of the Frankish state was achieved under Pepin's son, the legendary Charlemagne. Born around 742, Charlemagne reigned from 768 to 814, becoming one of Europe's most illustrious rulers. His reign was characterized by extensive conquests, crucial reforms, and profound cultural transformations, later collectively known as the Carolingian Renaissance. Charlemagne was a man of extraordinary stature and force of character. Contemporaries described him as tall, robust, and majestic, possessing a powerful voice and a charisma capable of inspiring thousands. He was an exceptional military commander and diplomat who, during his reign, annexed vast territories, encompassing nearly all of Western Europe, including the lands of present-day France, Germany, northern Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and a significant portion of Central Europe. Charlemagne conducted dozens of military campaigns, subjugating or unifying numerous peoples and lands under his rule. Among his most notable campaigns were those against the Lombards in Italy, the Saxons in northern Germany, and the Moors in Spain. It was during his campaigns against the Saxons that Charlemagne demonstrated not only military might, but also political acumen, compelling these tribes to adopt Christianity and fully integrating them into his empire. A landmark event in medieval European history was Charlemagne's coronation as emperor. On Christmas Day, December 25th, 800, in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Pope Leo III placed the imperial crown upon Charlemagne's head, proclaiming him emperor. This event symbolized the restoration of imperial authority in the West for the first time since the fall of the Roman Empire, establishing Charlemagne as the first Western European emperor in centuries. His empire, in essence, laid the foundation for future European nation-states. Yet Charlemagne's legacy extends beyond his role as conqueror and ruler. He was also a remarkable reformer. He understood that governing such a vast realm necessitated clear and effective laws and an efficient administrative system. Under his initiative, an extensive network of counties was established, governed by appointed counts. Additionally, a system of imperial envoys, known as the missi dominici, was introduced to oversee local officials and ensure adherence to royal decrees. Charlemagne placed significant emphasis on education and culture. He himself was highly educated and encouraged his courtiers and clergy to pursue knowledge. At his behest, schools were established in monasteries and bishoprics, offering instruction in grammar, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, music, and theology. The most distinguished was the Palace School at Aachen, headed by the English scholar Alcuin, who became one of the era's foremost intellectuals. This period, known as the Carolingian Renaissance, witnessed the revival of classical heritage, the creation of exquisite new manuscripts, and the development of the distinctive Carolingian minuscule script, which served as the precursor to modern lowercase letters. Architecture also flourished under Charlemagne, with his capital, Aachen, becoming a hub of monumental construction. The magnificent palace and the renowned Palatine Chapel, modeled after Byzantine structures, continue to awe with their grandeur and beauty. Charlemagne spent the majority of his reign in Aachen, transforming the city into a paramount center of political and cultural life in Europe. Charlemagne passed away in 814, leaving behind a colossal legacy. The empire, which united numerous peoples, was soon divided among his heirs through the Treaty of Verdun in 843, giving rise to the future states of Europe, France, Germany, and Italy. Following the division of Charlemagne's empire among his grandsons by the Treaty of Verdun in 843, the western portion, known as the West Frankish Kingdom, fell to the territories of present-day France. This moment represented a crucial step in the formation of France as a distinct entity and heralded a completely new era, the age of feudalism. Feudalism emerged as a logical progression of the administrative system established under the Carolingians. However, with political fragmentation and weakened central authority, local rulers, counts, and dukes gained immense autonomy. The king's power gradually diminished, and in certain regions, feudal lords became virtually independent princes, establishing their own small but potent principalities and duchies. This fragmentation was accompanied by constant internecine conflicts among feudal lords. Nearly every major lord sought to enhance his influence, expand his lands, and increase his personal power at the expense of his neighbors. The France of that era resembled a mosaic of hundreds of castles, fortresses, and estates, each possessing its own military force and administrative structure. Feudal relations were based on a system of vassalage. The king or a major feudal lord, the suzerain, granted landed estates and protection to his vassals, who, in turn, swore an oath of fealty and owed military service. Land became the primary source of power and wealth, and the feudal lord's castle served as the focal point of local life. Yet it was precisely this fragmentation, seemingly a weakness at first glance, that facilitated the development of a unique chivalric culture. Knights evolved from mere warriors into a distinct social class with their own traditions, etiquette, heroic ideals, and codes of conduct. A cult of honor and personal valor emerged, forming the bedrock of medieval French culture and literature. Amidst the persistent conflicts and the declining authority of the later Carolingians, by the end of the 10th century, France craved a new, powerful dynasty capable of unifying its disparate territories. In 987, Hugh Capet, a sign of a noble lineage, ascended to the throne of France. This marked the beginning of the Capetian era, a dynasty that would rule the country for over 3 centuries, solidifying its unity and transforming royal power into a tangible force. Hugh Capet was not the most powerful or affluent among the French feudal lords. His election to the throne was a compromise reached by the nobility, who considered him sufficiently weak to pose no threat to their own authority. However, contrary to expectations, it was the Capetians who proved capable not only of retaining the throne, but also of gradually augmenting the king's influence over local lords. The Capetians displayed exceptional political talent and perseverance, steadily and patiently consolidating their power. They adeptly utilized marriage and dynastic alliances to expand their domains and influence. The kings actively sought the support of the church, offering it patronage, lands, and privileges. Furthermore, considerable importance was placed on reinforcing the prestige of royal authority through the establishment of an effective administrative system. One of the most significant achievements of the Capetians was the affirmation of the principle of hereditary succession from father to son. Unlike the Merovingians and Carolingians, where the realm was periodically fractured among heirs, the Capetians succeeded in establishing stable succession to the throne through a direct male line. This principle played a crucial role in the gradual strengthening of central authority and the overall unity of France. It was under the Capetians that Paris firmly established itself as the capital of the French kingdom. The city began to flourish, with new fortifications, churches, and monasteries being constructed, and Paris soon evolved into the nation's primary cultural and political hub. During this period, the renowned Abbey of Saint-Denis was also founded, becoming the necropolis of the French monarchs. However, the consolidation of royal power was neither a swift nor an easy process. Throughout the 10th and 11th centuries, French kings were compelled to engage in constant struggles against powerful vassals, such as the Dukes of Normandy, Aquitaine, Burgundy, and the Counts of Champagne. Many of these possessed even greater wealth and military might than the king himself. Relations with the Dukes of Normandy, who by the 10th century had also become kings of England, were particularly fraught with tension. This era was marked by prolonged conflicts and wars that would ultimately lead to the celebrated 100 Years' War. Nevertheless, step by step, the Capetian kings gradually enhanced their authority and influence. Under Philip I, Louis VI, and Louis VII, central authority experienced a substantial strengthening. By the reign of the celebrated Philip II Augustus, who ruled in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, the kingdom had finally transformed into a powerful and unified entity. By the commencement of the 11th century, medieval France had become a land where chivalric culture and feudal traditions had reached their apex. It was in France that the unique phenomenon that would profoundly impact the history of Europe and the Middle East, forever altering perceptions of religion, heroism, and adventure, originated. This phenomenon was, undoubtedly, the Crusades. In 1095, Pope Urban II issued a fervent call for all Christians to journey eastward to liberate the Holy Land and the city of Jerusalem from Muslim rule. This proclamation was made in the French city of Clermont. French knights were the first and most enthusiastic to respond to this summons, becoming the primary driving force behind the First Crusade. The Crusades were more than mere religious wars. For many French knights, they represented a spiritual undertaking, an opportunity to gain wealth and glory, and a test of their personal valor and bravery. Participation in a crusade was considered a holy endeavor. Knights believed that through their participation, they could atone for their sins and receive absolution for any transgressions. The First Crusade commenced in 1096 and proved to be a monumental military enterprise, involving thousands of knights and tens of thousands of infantrymen, commoners, peasants, and artisans, united by their desire to liberate Jerusalem. Among the expedition's leaders were distinguished French knights and feudal lords, such as Count Raymond IV of Toulouse, Godfrey of Bouillon, and his brother Baldwin, Count Robert Curthose of Normandy, and many others. Their authority, wealth, and power attracted numerous warriors from across Europe. French knights displayed remarkable bravery and tenacity in combat, and in 999 they succeeded in capturing Jerusalem. The conquest of the city was accompanied by a brutal massacre, recounted with horror by contemporaries. Yet, for the Crusaders, it was a glorious victory, interpreted as a divine sign and the fulfillment of their mission. Following the capture of Jerusalem, French knights established several Christian states in the Holy Land, with the Kingdom of Jerusalem being the most prominent. It was the French who assumed leadership roles in most of these territories, establishing their own administrative systems, fortifying castles, and founding military religious orders like the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller. These orders became vital components of Crusader states and played a significant role not only in defense, but also in the economic and cultural development of the region. However, retaining these conquests proved far more challenging than acquiring them. In the ensuing decades, French knights constantly faced assaults from Muslim armies, leading to the organization of subsequent crusades aimed at reinforcing or restoring the Christian states of the East, the Second Crusade from 1147 to 1149, led by the French King Louis VII and the German Emperor Conrad III, proved unsuccessful and resulted in heavy losses for the Crusaders. This was a significant setback for European society in its chivalric ideals. However, the most renowned among the French monarchs was undoubtedly the Third Crusade, from 1189 to 1192, in which King Philip Augustus participated. Although he soon returned to France due to a dispute with the English king, Richard the Lionheart, the campaign once again highlighted the leading role of French monarchs and knights in the struggle for the Holy Land. The most dramatic and tragically ironic event was the Fourth Crusade, from 1202 to 1204, during which the Crusaders, instead of proceeding to Jerusalem, conquered the Christian city of Constantinople, causing profound shock throughout the Christian world. French knights also participated in subsequent crusades, including the notable expeditions of King Louis IX, known as Saint Louis. He became an archetype of the ideal crusader and was canonized by the Catholic Church. Louis IX embarked on two crusades in 1248 and 1270, suffering defeats in both instances, but earning immense respect and admiration across Europe for his piety, integrity, and adherence to chivalric ideals. The Crusades had far-reaching consequences, not only for the Middle East, but also for France itself. They fostered the development of trade and seafaring, brought Europeans into closer contact with the East, and opened access to new knowledge, technologies, and goods. Concurrently, the image of the knight as a defender of faith, a hero, and a traveler solidified, becoming an integral part of European, and particularly French, culture. France is the very cradle of the celebrated legends concerning the quest for the Holy Grail, tales of chivalrous knights, and narratives that extol valor and selflessness. Following the Crusades, a period during which French knights earned renown for their exploits in the East and laid the groundwork for a new European civilization, France found itself on the cusp of profound internal transformations. It was during this era that the kingdom embarked upon one of the most radiant chapters of its medieval history, the reign of Philip II Augustus. Under his rule, the nation not only solidified its standing across Europe, but also experienced a genuine renaissance, emerging as a formidable and prosperous power that commanded the respect of all neighboring states. Philip II, Augustus's tenure marked a pivotal, and in many respects, a watershed moment in the annals of medieval France. This monarch, who reigned from 1180 to 1223, established the foundations of a robust and centralized state, successfully expanded its territories considerably, and bolstered royal authority. Philip II Augustus ascended to power as a remarkably young man, merely 15 years of age. Nevertheless, from his earliest days on the throne, he demonstrated himself to be a capable and determined ruler. One of the foremost objectives confronting the new king was the reinforcement of the crown's authority, which at that juncture had been significantly undermined by powerful feudal lords. The conflict with the Dukes of Normandy, who simultaneously held the English throne and vast swathes of territory within France, was particularly acute. Philip Augustus proceeded with caution and perseverance, incrementally reclaiming lands for the direct dominion of the French crown. His initial significant triumph was the conquest of Artois, followed by other regions in northern France. However, the true turning point in relations with England and one of Philip's greatest achievements was his victory over the English King John Lackland in 1214 at the Battle of Bouvines. This battle is etched in history as one of the most consequential events of the Middle Ages, after which England relinquished most of its holdings on French soil. This enabled Philip Augustus to substantially enlarge the territory of France, fortify its unity, and enhance the prestige of royal governance. Following the triumph at Bouvines, the king was able to definitively consolidate control over significant territories such as Normandy, Brittany, Anjou, and Touraine. These regions became direct royal domain, thereby considerably strengthening central authority and empowering the king to directly administer a larger portion of France. Philip II Augustus recognized the importance of effective governmental administration. Thus, under his stewardship, an extensive administrative framework began to take shape. It was he who instituted the office of bailiffs, royal officials responsible for tax collection, the administration of justice, and the maintenance of order at the local level. Bailiffs served as direct representatives of the king in the regions, which helped to diminish the influence of local feudal magnates and establish a system of control subservient to a singular center. A paramount development of Philip II, Augustus's reign, was the establishment of Paris as the definitive capital of the French kingdom. It was during his rule that Paris underwent a true flourishing, transforming from a modest settlement into a preeminent center of European culture, commerce, and scholarship. The king decreed the encirclement of the city with formidable defensive walls, the construction of new bridges and thoroughfares, and the establishment of markets and trading squares that drew merchants from across Europe. The capital evolved into a crucial political, cultural, and economic hub on the continent, surpassing other European cities in significance. Philip Augustus actively patronized the construction of Gothic cathedrals and abbeys. During his reign, the commencement of building work on the Notre Dame Cathedral, which would become the quintessential emblem of medieval France, took place. The renowned Louvre, then still a fortified citadel designed to safeguard the royal treasury and the king himself, was also erected. The economic prosperity of France under Philip Augustus was intrinsically linked to the development of its cities, crafts, and trade. The king bestowed numerous privileges upon the towns, liberating their inhabitants from the dominion of local lords and granting them the right to self-governance. This policy stimulated urban population growth and fostered the advancement of crafts and commerce, which yielded substantial revenue for the treasury and contributed to the strengthening of royal power. Philip Augustus paid particular attention to the development of foreign trade, especially with Flanders, Italy, and the countries of the Near East. He encouraged the organization of fairs, which attracted thousands of merchants and artisans, becoming vital centers of Europe's economic activity. French cities such as Paris, Lyon, Orléans, and Chartres prospered thanks to these fairs, growing in wealth and influence. The era of Philip II Augustus's reign ushered in a new epoch, not only in the history of French statehood, but also in its cultural landscape. It was under his rule that the age began which would redefine the appearance of European cities and leave an indelible mark on art and architecture, the era of Gothic. The The Gothic style originated precisely in France during the 10th century and became the emblem of a new architectural paradigm, aspiring skyward and imbued with light. While the Romanesque style, which had dominated previously, was characterized by massive, heavy forms, a low profile, and a sense of enclosure, Gothic architecture introduced lightness, elegance, and an upward thrust. Soaring ribbed vaults, intricate windows adorned with stained glass, and soaring towers and spires all became the hallmark of this new architectural movement. The paramount symbol of the Gothic era is the Notre Dame Cathedral of Paris, known globally as Notre Dame de Paris. The construction of this magnificent edifice commenced in 1163 at the behest of the Bishop of Paris, Maurice de Sully, and continued for nearly 200 years. The cathedral was erected in the very heart of Paris, on the Ile de la Cité, where the principal events of French history had unfolded for centuries. Notre Dame embodied the finest attributes of the Gothic style. Its majestic facade, featuring two towers, a central rose window, and unique sculptural compositions, astonished contemporaries, and remains one of Paris's most iconic landmarks even today. The soaring ribbed vaults and enormous stained glass windows, depicting scenes from the lives of saints, allowed streams of colored light to penetrate the interior, creating an atmosphere of spiritual elevation and mystical communion with the divine. This effect held particular significance for medieval people who perceived it as a manifestation of divine presence. Notre Dame served not only as a spiritual, but also as a cultural nexus for Paris. It was the venue for crucial ecclesiastical and state ceremonies, royal coronations, festivals, church councils, and public assemblies. Over the centuries, it bore witness to many of the most dramatic and pivotal moments in French history. However, the Notre Dame Cathedral was but one of numerous Gothic masterpieces that were constructed in cities throughout France. Medieval France became adorned with a network of majestic cathedrals, among which the cathedrals of Chartres, Reims, Amiens, and Rouen stand out prominently. These cities vied with each other in the grandeur of their sacred structures, each striving to surpass its neighbors in the height of its towers, the beauty of its facades, and the complexity of its sculptural arrangements. The Chartres Cathedral, for instance, was renowned for its unparalleled stained glass windows, which to this day astound with their vibrant hues and exquisite designs. The Gothic era not only transformed the physical appearance of cities, but also influenced their inner life. Medieval towns evolved into significant economic and cultural centers, attracting merchants, artisans, students, and intellectuals. It was during the Gothic period that urban communities actively developed, gaining the right to self-governance. Civic authorities were responsible for infrastructure, organizing markets and fairs that fostered the prosperity of trade and crafts. With the growth of cities came the emergence of universities, the intellectual cradles of medieval Europe. The most celebrated and influential among these was the University of Paris, later known as the Sorbonne, founded around 1257 by the theologian Robert de Sorbonne as a college for indigent theology students. It rapidly became the premier educational institution in Europe, drawing students and professors from across the continent. The Sorbonne produced a multitude of eminent scholars, philosophers, and theologians, such as Thomas Aquinas, Albertus Magnus, and Roger Bacon, whose works profoundly influenced the development of European thought and science. Theology, philosophy, law, medicine, and the liberal arts were taught there, establishing the university as a vital center of intellectual life. A distinctive feature of medieval urban culture in France was also its literature. The Gothic era coincided with the flourishing of chivalric romances, courtly poetry, and epic heroic poems. It was during this time that writers, such as Chrétien de Troyes, created works that became classics of European literature. These were narratives concerning the exploits of the Knights of the Round Table, the quest for the Holy Grail, and the ideals of sublime love and fidelity, which shaped the medieval ideal of honor and nobility. Medieval French cities transformed into true hubs of culture and social life. Their inhabitants organized theatrical performances, mystery plays, and carnivals that attracted thousands of spectators. These public events cultivated a new urban culture founded on unity, festivity, and shared traditions. The epoch of prosperity and cultural flourishing that characterized France in the 10th century gradually yielded to more turbulent times. In the 10th century, the country found itself on the brink of one of the most protracted, dramatic, and devastating conflicts in its history, the 100 Years' War with England. This military engagement, which spanned 116 years from 1337 to 1453, exerted a profound influence on the destinies of both nations and all of Europe. The causes of this war were complex and deeply rooted in the early Middle Ages. The primary factor was the dispute over succession to the French throne following the extinction of the direct Capetian line in 1328. The last king of this dynasty, Charles IV, died without leaving direct heirs. The English king, Edward II, being the closest male relative through the female line, asserted his claim to the French crown. However, the French nobility rejected his demands, electing Philip VI of the House of Valois as the new king. This decision precipitated a profound conflict between the two kingdoms, which soon escalated into open warfare. Beyond dynastic causes, economic factors also played a role. As both nations sought to control the wealthy region of Flanders, a center of European textile manufacturing and trade. Flanders maintained close commercial ties with England, but was politically dependent on France. This divergence further intensified the rivalry between the two powers. The initial phases of the war proved exceptionally successful for the English. In 1346, one of the most significant and renowned battles of the war took place, the Battle of Crécy. English archers, armed with longbows, routed the French cavalry, inflicting a severe defeat upon the army of Philip VI. This battle was a genuine shock to France and demonstrated the superiority of the English's new military tactics. Following Crécy, the siege and capture of the town of Calais in 1347 occurred, which became a crucial English base on the continent and remained under their control for many decades. The next major phase of the war commenced under Edward the Black Prince, son of Edward III. In 1356, the Battle of Poitiers took place, during which the French king John II the Good was captured. This event plunged France into a profound crisis and led to severe internal discord. The kingdom became fractured. Peasant and urban uprisings erupted. The country was engulfed in chaos. In 1360, the Peace of Bretigny was concluded, under the terms of which England gained vast territories in southwestern France, including Gascony, Poitou, and other regions. However, this peace proved to be temporary. By the early 15th century, the war resumed with renewed intensity. In 1415, the English king, Henry V, achieved a famous victory at Agincourt, once again showcasing the superiority of English archers and tactics. Following this success, England controlled a significant portion of northern France, and in 1420, the Treaty of Troyes was signed, whereby the English king was recognized as the heir to the French throne. Yet it was precisely at this critical juncture for France that a miracle occurred with the emergence of Joan of Arc, a simple peasant girl from Lorraine. In 1429, Joan managed to inspire the French forces to fight and lift the siege of Orleans. This victory proved to be a turning point and restored hope to all of France. Although Joan herself was soon captured by the English and executed in 1431, her image and her heroic deed inspired the French to continue the war. From this point onward, the initiative definitively shifted to the French. The army of King Charles VII gradually reconquered the country's territory, driving out the English. The final major engagement of the war was the Battle of Castillon in 1453, in which the English suffered a definitive defeat. Following this, they retained only the port of Calais, which they held until 1558. The consequences of the 100 Years' War were immense for both nations. France, despite the devastation and heavy human losses, emerged from the war renewed and strengthened. The conflict helped to forge a sense of French national identity and unity. Royal authority was significantly consolidated after the war, while the influence of feudal lords diminished, paving the way for further state centralization. Militarily, the war highlighted the need to abandon outdated feudal armies in favor of professional troops, marking a crucial step towards the creation of a standing army. Warfare methods also underwent transformation. Artillery and infantry supplanted knightly cavalry. England, in contrast, lost almost all of its continental possessions, leading to a prolonged period of internal strife, the so-called Wars of the Roses. Upon the conclusion of the 100 Years' War, France entered an era of large-scale changes and a new cultural renaissance. The country gradually recovered from the severe aftermath of the war, regaining its power and aiming to assume a leading position in Europe. It was during this period that the French throne was occupied by a king who would play a pivotal role in shaping a new cultural and political epoch, Francis I. Francis I, who reigned from 1515 to 1547, became one of the most luminous and influential figures of his time. He was renowned not only as a skilled military commander and diplomat, but also as a true patron of arts and humanism, profoundly impacting the culture of all of Europe. It was under his reign that the Renaissance arrived in France, largely inspired by Italian masters and intellectuals. From the very outset of his reign, Francis actively sought to expand French influence in the Italian territories, which drew the country into a protracted series of conflicts known as the Italian Wars. These wars held not only political, but also cultural significance. French forces, as well as Francis's own court, came into direct contact with the brilliant Italian civilization, which was experiencing its greatest flourishing at that time. French nobles, officers, and royal emissaries, having visited Milan, Venice, Florence, and Rome, brought back with them an admiration for the new culture, art, and humanist ideas. Francis was so captivated by the Italian Renaissance that he began inviting the greatest masters of the era to France. Among them, Leonardo da Vinci held a special place, having been personally invited by the king. Leonardo arrived in France in 1516 and took up residence at the Château du Clos Lucé, near Amboise, where he spent the final years of his life. The king provided the artist and inventor with complete freedom and favorable conditions for his creative endeavors. It was in France that Leonardo completed his celebrated Mona Lisa, which subsequently became one of the most famous masterpieces of world painting. King Francis also invited other distinguished Italian artists, such as Rosso Fiorentino and Francesco Primaticcio, who adorned the royal palace of Fontainebleau with their frescoes and decorative compositions. This palace became a symbol of the new French style, blending Italian refinement with French elegance. Soon, the school of Fontainebleau, formed under the influence of these Italian artists, emerged as a vital center of Renaissance art and architecture in France. Francis I was passionate not only about art, but also about science, literature, and humanist ideals. During his reign, the works of Italian humanists such as Petrarch, Boccaccio, and Machiavelli began to be widely disseminated in France. The king supported the establishment of libraries, patronized publishing activities, and fostered the development of humanist education. One of Francis's most significant achievements in culture and education was the founding in 1530 of the Collège de France, the first institution of higher learning entirely dedicated to humanist studies. The Collège de France was established as an alternative to the traditional Sorbonne and quickly gained a reputation as a premier European educational center. It was here that such eminent scholars as Guillaume Boudet, the foremost French humanist of his time, and Jacques Lefebvre d'Etaples, who influenced the intellectual life of all of Europe, taught. Francis I was also actively engaged in architecture, striving to adorn his country with new and magnificent structures in the spirit of the Italian Renaissance. During his reign, the construction and renovation of the renowned French chateaux of Chambord and Chenonceau began, which even today inspire awe with their grandeur and harmonious proportions. The Italian architects and artists who worked at the French court significantly transformed the character of French architecture, laying the groundwork for the further development of the classical style. However, despite all the cultural achievements, the reign of Francis I was marked by numerous wars. The Italian Wars, though they led to a temporary expansion of territories and a strengthening of France's prestige in Europe, were extremely costly and financially drained the country. The prolonged confrontation with the Habsburgs, particularly with Emperor Charles V, prevented France from consolidating its position in Italy and compelled it to focus on domestic affairs. Nevertheless, the era of Francis I remains in French history as a time of unprecedented cultural elevation and openness to new ideas. The Italian influence, which arrived in France through the king's policies, forever altered French art, architecture, literature, and education. Thanks to Francis I, the French Renaissance became a crucial milestone in the development not only of France, but of all European civilization. laying the foundations for a cultural flourishing that would continue through the subsequent centuries. Following the period of French Renaissance prosperity and cultural resurgence under Francis I, France once again faced profound internal conflicts that fundamentally altered its history and society. This ushered in the era of the Wars of Religion, one of the most dramatic and bloody periods in the country's history, when faith became the cause of protracted clashes and discord, dividing the nation into two hostile camps. The cause of these conflicts was the Reformation, a large-scale movement that began in Europe in the first half of the 15th century. In France, adherents of Protestantism, predominantly of the Calvinist persuasion, came to be known as Huguenots. They sought radical changes in the church and society, rejecting the authority of the Pope and demanding a simplification of church life, a renunciation of luxury and ceremonies, and the translation of the Bible into accessible languages. Many members of the French nobility and the urban populace became Huguenots, seeking to escape the influence of the Catholic Church and strengthen their independence. However, the Catholic majority in France viewed the spread of Protestantism with hostility and alarm. Kings and the courtly elite saw the Huguenots as a threat to state stability, and the Catholic Church perceived them as a threat to its influence and authority. Gradually, religious differences began to acquire an increasingly acute political character, leading to outbreaks of violence and repression. The Wars of Religion commenced in 1562 with the bloody massacre at Vassy, where Catholic soldiers attacked unarmed Huguenots gathered for a religious service. This event marked the starting point for a series of armed confrontations that swept across France for over 30 years. The culmination of the protracted conflict was the harrowing St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, which transpired on August 24, 1572. Initiated in Paris as a targeted elimination of Huguenot leaders, orchestrated by the Queen Mother Catherine de' Medici. This brutal slaughter swiftly engulfed the entirety of France. Over several weeks, tens of thousands of Huguenots, encompassing nobles, artisans, merchants, common townsfolk, and peasants, met their demise. This sanguinary episode became a stark emblem of the religious intolerance and savagery of that era, sending profound shockwaves across the continent. Following the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, the hostilities escalated into an even more ferocious engagement. Despite sustaining immense casualties, the Huguenots resolutely continued their struggle for their rights and their faith. Their leader and a beacon of resistance emerged as Henry of Navarre, a charismatic and skilled military commander, hailing from the Protestant lineage of the royal Bourbon family. Through the course of this prolonged struggle and intricate political maneuvering, it was precisely Henry of Navarre who was destined to play a pivotal role in bringing the religious wars to a close. In 1589, upon the passing of the final monarch from the Valois dynasty, Henry of Navarre ascended as the rightful heir to the French throne. However, he confronted a formidable quandary. The vast majority of the populace remained Catholic and was disinclined to accept a Protestant sovereign. Recognizing this reality, Henry adopted a pragmatic course of action, publicly embracing Catholicism in 1593 with the memorable declaration, "Paris is well worth a Mass." A year later, he formally assumed the crown as Henry IV. Yet, Henry did not forsake his former co-religionists. To foster reconciliation between Catholics and Protestants, and to finally terminate the protracted conflicts, he promulgated the renowned Edict of Nantes in 1598. This landmark decree was the first to formally acknowledge the Huguenots' right to freedom of worship and granted them a suite of significant political and religious liberties, thereby solidifying the principle of religious tolerance and ushering in an end to the bloodshed. Despite the official reconciliation, the ramifications of the religious wars were profoundly detrimental to France. The nation had suffered the loss of hundreds of thousands of its people. Numerous cities lay in ruins. The economy was in shambles, and society was deeply fractured. Concurrently, the religious conflict served as a stark illustration of the perils of fanaticism and underscored the imperative of finding common ground between the state and religious factions. France's experience offered a crucial lesson for all of Europe. These occurrences exerted a considerable influence on the cultural and societal fabric of France. The tragedy of the Saint Bartholomew's Day massacre found its echo in countless literary and artistic creations, serving as an enduring reminder of the horrors that religious intolerance can unleash. The religious wars also shaped the evolution of political thought. Within France, principles of religious tolerance, liberty, conscience, and human rights began to be vigorously debated. These discussions laid the groundwork for future political and societal transformations. Following the tumultuous era of religious warfare and internal discord, France gradually began to mend its divisions and restore stability. In this evolving landscape, royal authority progressively consolidated, driven by a desire to preclude any recurrence of past conflicts. It was precisely this aspiration that fueled the ascent of absolutism, a political system characterized by the complete concentration of power in the hands of a single individual, the monarch. The zenith of French absolutism was reached during the reign of Louis XIV, famously known as the Sun King. Louis XIV, whose reign was remarkably long, spanning from 1643 to 1715, etched his name into history as the embodiment of absolute monarchy. Even in his youth, having endured the severe upheavals of the Fronde, a rebellion of the nobility against royal authority, he became convinced of the necessity for a strong, centralized government capable of ensuring order and stability. Upon assuming full governance, he articulated the now legendary statement, "L'État, c'est moi," the state, it is I, thereby encapsulating the core tenet of absolutism, the complete identification of the state with the person of the king. The most significant symbol and manifestation of Louis XIV's absolute power was the magnificent palace complex of Versailles. Situated a few kilometers from Paris, originally a modest hunting lodge, under Louis XIV, it was transformed into an exceedingly opulent palace, complete with elaborate gardens, fountains, pavilions, and grand halls. The construction and adornment of Versailles involved the foremost architects, artists, and garden designers of the era, including Louis Levaux, Jules Ardouin Mansart, the painter Charles Lebrun, and the renowned landscape architect André Le Nôtre. Versailles evolved beyond a mere royal residence to become a nexus of political and cultural life in Europe. Louis deliberately relocated his court to Versailles to maintain constant surveillance over the nobility and prevent any resurgence of a Fronde-like uprising. A unique atmosphere of opulence and stringent etiquette was cultivated at court. designed to engross the nobility in an unending cycle of ceremonies, diversions, and festivities, thereby diverting their attention from political influence. The court of Versailles became a model for other European monarchies, many of which sought to emulate the French style. Louis XIV understood the critical importance of propagating his authority and magnificence. Consequently, every aspect, from ceremonial portraits and interior designs to courtly rituals, served a singular purpose: reinforcing the king's prestige and image as an omnipotent ruler whose will was law. However, Louis XIV's reign is remembered not solely for the splendor and grandeur of Versailles. It was during his tenure that France experienced a period of significant economic and cultural flourishing. The monarch actively fostered the advancement of industry, trade, and infrastructure. His finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, implemented a mercantilist policy aimed at strengthening the national economy, expanding foreign trade, and increasing France's colonial holdings. Louis XIV also placed particular emphasis on culture and the arts. He was a patron of prominent cultural figures of his time, such as the playwright Molière, the composer Jean-Baptiste Lully, and the painters Nicolas Poussin and Charles Lebrun. His court was a vibrant hub for theater, opera, ballet, and music. It was during this era that French classicism, characterized by clarity, harmony, and strict rules, definitively took shape in France, and subsequently became the dominant style across Europe for many years. Louis XIV also focused on bolstering the military and expanding French territory. He engaged in numerous wars, including the War of the Spanish Succession, the Franco-Dutch War, and the War of Devolution, all in his pursuit of establishing France as the preeminent European power. While these conflicts yielded significant territorial gains for France, they also proved exceedingly costly and drained the nation's economy. Not all of Louis XIV's endeavors were successful. His revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, which had guaranteed the rights of the Huguenots, triggered a mass exodus of Protestants from France. This resulted in substantial economic and intellectual losses for the country, as the Huguenots constituted a vital segment of French merchants and artisans. The concluding years of Louis XIV's reign were overshadowed by arduous wars, financial difficulties, and public discontent. Despite these challenges, the Sun King left behind a monumental legacy that irrevocably transformed France and Europe. The epoch of his rule is recognized as the golden age of French absolutism, a time when the monarch's power reached its zenith and French culture and arts attained their peak. Consequently, the era of Louis XIV was a period of stark contrasts and paradoxes. On one hand, it was an epoch of unprecedented grandeur and lavishness. On the other, it was a time of brutal wars, profound social contradictions, and economic hardships. Nevertheless, despite these inherent contradictions, it was during this period that France's identity as a formidable centralized state, a cultural capital of Europe, and a paradigm of absolute monarchy was forged, with Louis XIV, the great Sun King, forever serving as its enduring symbol. Following the era of Louis XIV's absolute rule, which epitomized the majesty and opulence of monarchy, France began a gradual transformation. The resplendence of Versailles, the rigid etiquette, and the monarch's boundless authority, once perceived as immutable, soon engendered significant questioning and critical scrutiny within society. Thus commenced the period known as the Enlightenment, an era that witnessed the supplanting of unquestioning deference to authority with a fervent belief in reason, science, and progress. The Enlightenment era was a time of profound contemplation regarding the nature of humanity, society, and governance. Enlightenment thinkers endeavored to comprehend the world through the sole lens of reason and empirical observation, vehemently rejecting outdated dogma and ingrained prejudice. It was within France that the ideas of the Enlightenment gained exceptional momentum and influence, with the philosophers, writers, and scholars of this period becoming authorities whose opinions resonated throughout Europe. Among the most influential philosophers of this epoch was François-Marie Arouet, more widely known as Voltaire. Voltaire was a man of extraordinary wit, courage, and independence. His life was punctuated by significant events, scandals, and confrontations with the authorities. On one occasion, for penning sharp satirical verses, critical of the regent, Philippe d'Orléans, he was even confined to the Bastille. It was this incarceration that prompted Voltaire to contemplate the struggle against tyranny and arbitrary power. Later, following a dispute with an influential nobleman, Voltaire was compelled to seek exile in England, where he developed a deep admiration for the English Parliament and the freedoms it afforded, which appeared extraordinary compared to French absolutism. England served as his inspiration for the creation of his renowned philosophical letters in 1734. These letters constituted a direct challenge to French society. Voltaire lauded English liberties while simultaneously criticizing religious intolerance, the arbitrary nature of royal power, and the backwardness of French institutions. The book was subsequently banned in France, and its copies were publicly burned by the executioner. However, this prohibition only served to amplify Voltaire's popularity and the dissemination of his ideas. Voltaire was also a brilliant literary figure. His works, such as Candide or Optimism, satirized the naive belief that the world was inherently perfect and just. In his writings, Voltaire sharply critiqued not only the monarchy, but also the church, accusing it of ignorance and cruelty. He was a staunch advocate for freedom of speech, religious tolerance, and human rights. To him is attributed the famous utterance, "I do not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," which became a symbol of the defense of freedom of opinion and expression. Another towering intellect of the Enlightenment era was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. In contrast to Voltaire, Rousseau hailed from a modest family background. For a considerable period, he lived as a wandering musician, a secretary, and a tutor. He gained prominence following the publication of his treatise, Discourse on the Arts and Sciences, in which he argued that civilization and progress had corrupted human nature, distancing individuals from their natural state of goodness and freedom. Rousseau idealized the concept of humanity in its primitive, uncorrupted state, contending that people were inherently free and content prior to the advent of private property and societal inequality. In his seminal work, The Social Contract, published in 1762, he presented a groundbreaking concept. Legitimate authority, he posited, is founded upon the consent of the people, and the collective society in its entirety holds sovereignty. This notion became a foundational principle for numerous revolutions and declarations of human rights. Rousseau also profoundly influenced pedagogical thought with his book Emile, or On Education, advocating for an educational approach that nurtures children's natural inclinations and needs. Charles-Louis de Secondat, Baron de la Brède et de Montesquieu, the third preeminent philosopher of this era, originated from an aristocratic lineage and dedicated a significant portion of his career to legal practice. His magnum opus, The Spirit of the Laws, published in 1748, irrevocably altered the course of political philosophy in Europe. Within this work, Montesquieu first articulated the principle of the separation of powers into legislative, executive, and judicial branches, a mechanism designed to prevent despotism and the abuse of authority. Montesquieu not only described, but also proposed a practical framework for governmental organization, which subsequently formed the bedrock of the United States Constitution and significantly influenced constitutional reforms in France and other European nations. His extensive travels, during which he studied English, jurisprudence, and various political systems, lent his writings considerable persuasive power and depth of argumentation. Beyond its philosophical currents, the Enlightenment era was also marked by a monumental cultural undertaking that served as its emblem, the creation of the renowned Encyclopédie. This prodigious endeavor, overseen by the philosopher Denis Diderot and the mathematician Jean-Laurent d'Alembert, aimed to synthesize all accessible human knowledge and render it comprehensible to everyone. Hundreds of distinguished scholars and writers contributed to its creation, including Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu. The Encyclopédie emerged not only as a symbol of the epoch, but also as a crucial instrument for disseminating new ideas and knowledge. Despite facing stringent censorship and pressure from the authorities, the encyclopedists persevered in their work, and their collective contribution significantly impacted public consciousness. The Enlightenment era laid the crucial groundwork for transformative historical shifts. The ideas conceived during this period formed the foundation of the French Revolution and became an integral part of contemporary democratic culture. Freedom of speech and the press, the principles of human rights and civil liberties, the separation of powers, and the concept of the social contract all represent the enduring legacy of the Enlightenment philosophers, who reshaped not only France, but the entire world. Following the Age of Enlightenment, a period characterized by the widespread dissemination of ideas concerning liberty, equality, and justice across France, and their captivating influence on broad segments of society, the nation began to rapidly approach a revolutionary crisis. Amidst this intellectual surge, persistent and unresolved issues, which had accumulated over decades and created the conditions for far-reaching societal transformations, became starkly apparent. These fundamental problems can be broadly categorized into two principal causes: profound social inequality and severe economic hardships. By the late 18th century, France remained a society rigidly structured by estates, divided into three clearly delineated orders: the clergy, the nobility, and the third estate, which encompassed the burgeoning bourgeoisie, urban artisans, and the overwhelming majority of the peasantry. The first two estates, the clergy and the nobility, despite their diminutive numbers, representing less than 5% of the population, possessed the lion's share of landed wealth, and enjoyed numerous privileges that exempted them from most taxes and levies. This inequitable distribution of rights and responsibilities became a primary catalyst for the widespread discontent permeating the Third Estate. The peasantry, constituting over 80% of France's populace, bore the crushing weight of the tax burden, including feudal obligations, church tithes, and levies to the king and local officials. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that peasants were also compelled to perform various labor services, remnants of medieval practices that were viewed as anachronistic. The bourgeoisie, the urban entrepreneurs, merchants, bankers, and the educated strata of the Third Estate also experienced significant dissatisfaction with the prevailing order. Representatives of the bourgeoisie played a crucial role in the nation's economic life, but were largely deprived of political influence and parity with the nobility. They resented the situation where, despite possessing substantial capital and education, they were unable to participate meaningfully in state governance and were obliged to defer to the aristocracy, which was often less competent and educated. Thus, by the late 18th century, France was bifurcated into two opposing realities. The first was a world of opulent palaces and lavish receptions, where the aristocracy luxuriated in idleness and extravagance, enjoying an abundance of every necessity. The second world was one of destitution and arduous labor, where the peasantry and the urban underclass confronted daily hardship, hunger, and injustice. This social dichotomy steadily intensified, engendering palpable tension within the country and rendering revolution an inevitable outcome. However, inequality represented but one facet of a complex panorama. The second, equally critical, determinant of the revolutionary crisis was the array of economic problems that, in the decades preceding the revolution, had escalated to catastrophic proportions. The French economy found itself ensnared in a profound financial crisis, precipitated by both internal and external factors. Enormous state expenditures, attributable to the extravagant lifestyle of the royal court, and persistent military engagements, such as the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, and France's involvement in the American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783, had utterly depleted the treasury. The national debt reached unprecedented levels, compelling the government to continuously augment the tax burden on the populace. The situation was drastically worsened by crop failures that afflicted France in the late 1780s. Particularly devastating was the year 1788, when adverse weather conditions resulted in a complete collapse of the harvest. The prices of bread, the staple food for the majority, soared, leading to widespread famine in numerous regions of the country. Dissatisfaction among the poorest segments of society began to manifest on a massive and perilous scale, with unrest and spontaneous uprisings sweeping across France. The royal administration proved incapable of mounting an adequate response to these mounting challenges. Attempts by King Louis XVI and his ministers to implement reforms and increase taxation on privileged estates were met with vehement resistance from the nobility and clergy, who were unwilling to relinquish their prerogatives. The convocation of the Estates General in 1789, rather than resolving the nation's issues, only served to underscore the depth of the divisions and the crisis of authority. By the close of the 18th century, France stood on the precipice of a profound crisis. On one hand, the stark social disparity and inherent injustices fueled widespread public discontent, while on the other, severe economic predicaments and the inefficiency of governmental administration rendered the situation virtually untenable. Society, inspired by the Enlightenment ideals of equality and justice, could no longer tolerate the existing state of affairs and clamored for change. Following France's descent into a severe socio-economic crisis, events began to unfold with astonishing rapidity. The tensions that had been accumulating for decades reached a boiling point in the summer of 1789. The commencement of the French Revolution is traditionally marked by the storming of the Bastille on July 14th, 1789. The Bastille, a medieval fortress situated in the very heart of Paris, served as a potent symbol of royal caprice and tyranny. Despite housing only a handful of prisoners by the late 18th century, in the eyes of Parisians, it remained a menacing emblem of absolute monarchy. The capture of the Bastille represented not merely a symbolic act of defiance against despotism, but the true genesis of the revolution. The insurgent populace, armed and galvanized against the royal forces, seized the fortress after a brutal and bloody confrontation. This event demonstrated that the monarch's authority was no longer absolute, and that the people were now prepared to chart their own destiny. The ensuing months and years witnessed a period of immense upheaval. Royal authority rapidly eroded. King Louis XVI, unable to control the unfolding events, was compelled to acquiesce to the decrees of the National Constituent Assembly, established by the revolutionaries. Following his unsuccessful attempt to flee the country in 1791, his reputation was irrevocably tarnished. Louis XVI was placed under house arrest and effectively stripped of virtually all power. Meanwhile, the revolution grew increasingly radical. In 1792, the First French Republic was proclaimed, and the monarchy was officially abolished. Louis XVI was accused of treason and brought to trial. His trial became one of the most dramatic episodes of the revolution, symbolizing a definitive break with the past. On January 21st, 1793, the king was executed by guillotine in the Place de la Révolution, now Place de la Concorde, before a vast crowd that observed the event with a mixture of apprehension and jubilation. The king's execution served as a symbolic act, signifying the end of the monarchical era and the complete consolidation of new revolutionary power. However, following the demise of Louis XVI, France did not find tranquility. On the contrary, the revolution entered its most radical and sanguinary phase, historically known as the Reign of Terror, spearheaded by the Jacobins. The Jacobins, members of the most revolutionary and influential political club, advocated for immediate sweeping reforms and the eradication of all opposition to the revolution. The leading figure was Maximilien Robespierre, a jurist, politician, and orator, renowned for his unwavering resolve and fervent devotion to revolutionary ideals. Robespierre envisioned forging a new France, built upon the pillars of republican virtue, equality, and justice. However, his methods proved exceptionally severe and repressive. Under his direction, a period commenced that would be etched in history as the Reign of Terror, spanning from 1793 to 1794. Thousands, suspected of disloyalty to the revolution, were dispatched to the scaffold. Many were found guilty merely for not embracing the radical doctrines of the Jacobins. The guillotine became a chilling emblem of the era. Executions occurred almost daily, and an atmosphere of dread and suspicion permeated society. Robespierre genuinely believed that terror was an indispensable tool for safeguarding the revolution from both external adversaries and internal dissenters. Yet gradually, the pervasive fear, the relentless repressions, and the lack of stability engendered discontent, even among Robespierre's own supporters. Before long, Robespierre himself became a victim of the very system he had established. On the 9th of Thermidor, July 27th, 1794, Robespierre and his closest associates were apprehended. The following day, they met their end on the guillotine, becoming the final casualties of the Reign of Terror. Robespierre's downfall marked the conclusion of the revolution's radical phase. France, weary of the bloodshed and unending persecutions, began seeking stability and order. A more moderate authority gradually took hold, known as the Directory, which endeavored to guide society back to normalcy by tempering revolutionary extremism and ceasing the mass executions. Nevertheless, despite the sanguinary events of the Terror, the period of Jacobin ascendancy held profound historical significance. It illuminated the perilous nature of radicalism and intolerance, while simultaneously the sweeping reforms enacted by the Jacobins irrevocably transformed French society. The vestiges of feudalism were dismantled, the principle of equal rights for all citizens before the law was proclaimed, an extensive secularization of society, and educational reforms were initiated. Following the tumultuous events of the French Revolution, including the execution of Louis XVI and the era of Jacobin terror, France, and indeed all of Europe, were forever altered. The Revolution, which began as a struggle for liberty and equality, not only instigated profound internal changes within France, but also exerted immense influence on political and social dynamics worldwide. The foremost and most apparent consequence of the French Revolution was the complete obliteration of absolute monarchy and the feudal system. The hereditary privileges of the nobility and clergy were abolished, leading to the dissolution of the feudal order and solidifying the concept of equality for all citizens under the law. French society ceased to be rigidly stratified by estates, thereby opening new avenues for the burgeoning middle class, the bourgeoisie, which emerged as the principal driving force behind the economy and politics. The adoption in August 1789 of the renowned Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen represented a pivotal achievement. This document proclaimed the fundamental rights and freedoms of every individual: freedom of speech, press and assembly, the right to property, security, and resistance to oppression. The Declaration of the Rights of Man became the bedrock of the modern legal state, inspiring the subsequent creation of constitutions and human rights declarations across the globe. A significant outcome of the revolution was the widespread secularization of French society. The authority of the Catholic Church, which had historically played a central role in national life, was severely undermined. Church lands were nationalized, monasteries were closed, and the clergy was subordinated to the state. For the first time in history, France declared the principle of a secular state, separating church and government, and significantly curtailing religion's influence on public affairs. The economic repercussions of the revolution were highly mixed. On one hand, the abolition of feudal obligations and the establishment of a unified national market significantly accelerated the development of the economy, trade, and industry. On the other hand, the years of revolutionary upheaval, terror, and incessant warfare severely damaged the French economy, leading to inflation and economic instability, the consequences of which were felt for decades. The French Revolution also fundamentally reshaped the nation's political structure. Absolute monarchy gave way, initially to a republic, then to a dictatorship, and subsequently to the authoritarian rule of Napoleon Bonaparte. In a brief span, France experienced several drastic shifts in power and political regimes, an unprecedented experience for Europe at that time. One of the most significant consequences of the revolution was the emergence of mass politics. For the first time, broad segments of the population, peasants, artisans, workers, and members of the middle class, began to actively participate in the country's political life. Numerous political clubs and organizations sprang into existence. This gave rise to modern political culture, founded on the active engagement of citizens in state affairs. The French Revolution had a colossal impact on the international arena and European politics. The ideals of liberty, equality, and popular sovereignty spread far beyond France's borders, resonating throughout all European nations. European monarchs, alarmed by the revolutionary example, began intensifying their control and repressions, attempting to quash any replication of the French experience. Concurrently, many European peoples saw the French Revolution as a model for their own struggles for freedom and equality, commencing active campaigns against feudalism and absolutism within their own countries. Particularly significant were the Napoleonic Wars, which engulfed almost all of Europe and even territories beyond its confines. Napoleon Bonaparte, who rose to lead France in the revolution's aftermath, sought to disseminate its ideas while simultaneously extending his personal dominion across Europe. Although his empire was ultimately defeated, the Napoleonic Wars dismantled the old feudal order in Europe and laid the groundwork for the emergence of modern nation-states. Furthermore, the French Revolution provided a powerful impetus for the growth of nationalism in Europe. Peoples began to perceive themselves as distinct national communities, possessing the right to self-determination and independence. This nationalism played a crucial role in the events of the 19th and 20th centuries, fueling numerous liberation movements, revolutions, and the formation of contemporary nation-states. The revolution also exerted a profound influence on culture and education. The Enlightenment principles that underpinned the revolution fostered the development of mass education, the dissemination of literacy, and scientific advancement. Society became more open and enlightened, and education became accessible to much broader segments of the population. After the turbulent events of the French Revolution and the brutal Jacobin terror, France found itself in a state of profound political crisis. The nation required a strong leader capable of restoring order, reestablishing stability, and consolidating the state after prolonged years of turmoil and devastation. It was at this juncture that a figure emerged onto the historical stage, destined to become the symbol of a new era, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was born on August 15, 1769, on the island of Corsica, into a family of minor nobility. From an early age, he displayed ambition, keen intellect, and decisiveness. After receiving military training in France, he quickly distinguished himself among his peers, demonstrating not only strategic acumen, but also an exceptional will to win. Napoleon's first opportunity to prove himself arose during the Revolutionary period. In 1793, he commanded the artillery assault on Toulon, a city occupied by British and Royalist forces. Owing to his bold and unconventional approach to military operations, Napoleon achieved a decisive victory, earning him recognition from the revolutionary leaders and marking the beginning of his meteoric career. The next significant moment in the young general's trajectory was his role in suppressing the Royalist uprising in Paris in 1795. Napoleon resolutely quashed the revolt, ordering the use of grapeshot against the insurgents. This event definitively cemented his reputation as a resolute and skilled commander, capable of maintaining order within the country. In 1796, Napoleon was assigned command of the French army in Italy. Despite his army being poorly equipped and facing supply shortages, he displayed extraordinary military talents. Within mere months, he managed to defeat superior Austrian forces, conquer northern Italy, and compel the enemy to enter peace negotiations. It was this campaign that brought him widespread fame and established him as a national hero in France. Beyond his military victories, Napoleon expertly utilized propaganda. He personally penned appeals and reports of his triumphs, dispatching them to Paris, thereby becoming a true idol of the French populace. His image as a decisive and brilliant general was widely circulated in newspapers and pamphlets, further solidifying his popularity. Following his triumphant return to France, Napoleon embarked on a new ambitious undertaking, the Egyptian campaign of 1798. Aiming to strike at British interests in the East and bolster France's position in the Mediterranean, he invaded Egypt and secured several victories, including the celebrated Battle of the Pyramids. However, the success was short-lived. Soon the British fleet, under the command of Admiral Nelson, destroyed the French ships off the coast of Egypt, leaving Napoleon isolated from his homeland. Despite the hardships of the Egyptian expedition, Napoleon secretly returned to France in 1799, finding it in a state of chaos and instability. The Directory's political regime had lost public confidence. The economy was in decline, and public morale deteriorated daily. Napoleon capitalized on this crisis. On November 9th, 1799, the 18th of Brumaire, according to the revolutionary calendar, with the support of his loyal troops, he orchestrated a coup d'etat. Consequently, the Directory was overthrown, and power transitioned to 3 consuls, with Napoleon becoming the first consul, effectively the sole ruler of the nation. Napoleon's new regime proved effective and swiftly restored the stability that had been so desperately lacking after years of revolutionary disorder. As first consul, Napoleon commenced extensive reforms aimed at strengthening state authority and improving national governance. He centralized the administration, streamlined the judicial system, regulated finances, and re-established relations with the Catholic Church by concluding the Concordat of 1801. Napoleon's popularity soared, and his authority became increasingly absolute. On December 2nd, 1804, in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, he performed an unprecedented act. He crowned himself Emperor of the French, thereby demonstrating complete independence from past traditions and simultaneously signaling the end of France's Republican era. Thus, in an astonishingly brief period, Napoleon transitioned from a little-known officer to a man dictating the fate of France and Europe. He skillfully leveraged the revolutionary events to rapidly ascend the social and political ladder, establishing a new form of governance based not on inherited privilege, but on personal merit, talent, and charisma. Upon assuming power, Napoleon fully recognized that the revolution's gains needed not only to be consolidated, but also molded into a clear and efficient system of national administration. To this end, he initiated a series of far-reaching reforms that would form the foundation of modern French statehood and shape France's development for decades to come. Among Napoleon's most significant and enduring transformations were the Civil Code, the reform of the education system, and a profound reorganization of the military. One of Napoleon's principal achievements, which left a lasting impact on the global legal system, was the renowned Civil Code, known as the Napoleonic Code, adopted in 1804. This compilation of laws unified disparate revolutionary statutes and older French legal traditions into a cohesive, logical, and accessible system for every citizen. The Code was founded on the principles of equality before the law, protection of private property, freedom of conscience, and freedom of contract. The creation of a unified code was a historically imperative step. Prior to its introduction, France possessed a multitude of diverse and conflicting laws inherited from previous eras. The Napoleonic Code rendered justice transparent and comprehensible, regulated civil relations, family law, and inheritance matters, thereby ensuring stability and predictability in societal life. A crucial innovation was the recognition of the absolute equality of all citizens under the law and the abolition of estate privileges. For the first time in French history, all citizens, irrespective of their origin or status, were granted equal rights and responsibilities, and private property became guaranteed and inviolable. The code was not only revolutionary for its time, but also remarkably enduring. Its provisions became the basis for civil legislation in numerous European countries and continue to be utilized in legal practice even today. An equally significant reform implemented by Napoleon was the extensive restructuring of the educational system. Napoleon keenly understood that a strong and stable state was impossible without educated citizens. To this end, he initiated the establishment of a new national system of education, accessible to broader segments of society. Napoleon founded a network of lycées, state-run schools, where education was structured around strict discipline and a well-defined curriculum, encompassing not only humanities but also mathematics, natural sciences, history, and physical training. Graduates of these lycées became highly qualified personnel for civil service and the officer corps of the French army. These lycées operated under strict state supervision, ensuring high-quality instruction and uniform standards. Furthermore, Napoleon established prestigious higher educational institutions, such as the École Polytechnique, intended for the training of France's elite. As a result of his educational reforms, Napoleon succeeded in creating a stratum of educated officials and military specialists who, for many years, ensured the effective administration of the country. The military was another domain that Napoleon deemed paramount for the state. As a brilliant commander, he paid particular attention to military reform. transforming the French army into a formidable and mobile force capable of confronting superior enemy numbers. Napoleon entirely altered the army's recruitment system. The old method, based on conscription, was replaced by universal military service, introduced during the Revolution but perfected by Napoleon. This allowed for the rapid formation of numerous and well-trained troops, ensuring a continuous influx of skilled reserves. The army became more professional, strictly organized, and equipped with the latest technology of the era. Napoleon introduced the core system for army organization, comprising autonomous units capable of operating independently, which lent the troops mobility and flexibility on the battlefield. Key aspects of the reform also included the creation of a general staff and improvements in officer training. The French army of that period was renowned not only for its discipline and organization, but also for its high morale. Napoleon fully grasped the importance of soldiers' morale, personally overseeing troop supplies and provisions, regularly inspecting his armies, and maintaining a close, emotional connection with his soldiers. Soldiers and officers idolized their emperor, transforming Napoleon's army into a virtually invincible force, capable of undertaking grand campaigns and defeating numerically superior enemy armies. Napoleon's era was characterized not only by extensive domestic reforms, but also by an active foreign policy, manifested in numerous military campaigns across Europe. The Napoleonic Wars became one of the largest and most dramatic conflicts in world history, fundamentally altering Europe's political landscape and laying the groundwork for the formation of the modern world. By the dawn of the 19th century, France, thanks to Napoleon's genius and the might of its army, had become the dominant power on the European continent. The emperor managed to create a vast empire encompassing a significant portion of Europe. France controlled Italy, Spain, Holland, Germany, and other territories. However, incessant warfare depleted the nation's resources and ignited resistance from subjugated peoples, ultimately leading to the downfall of Napoleon's regime. In 1812, Napoleon launched his most colossal and ambitious military operation, the invasion of Russia. This campaign proved to be a turning point in his empire's destiny. Napoleon's Grande Armée, numbering over 600,000 soldiers, crossed the border of the Russian Empire in June 1812. Despite initial successes and victory at the Battle of Borodino, the French failed to achieve a decisive outcome. The Russian army continued to retreat, avoiding a pitched battle and luring the enemy deeper into the country's territory. On September 14, 1812, Napoleon entered Moscow, expecting that the capture of the ancient capital would compel the Russians to sue for peace. Instead, he found an empty city ravaged by fire, abandoned by its inhabitants, and devoid of any supplies or resources. Napoleon's expectations were not met. Alexander I refused to negotiate, and the French army was compelled to commence an arduous retreat. The French withdrawal from Russia became one of the most tragic chapters in military history. Amidst the harsh Russian winter, lacking sufficient provisions, and pursued by Russian troops and partisans, the remnants of the Grande Armée were almost entirely annihilated. Of the 600,000, only approximately 40,000 returned to France. This defeat severely undermined Napoleon's military strength and prestige, inspiring the European powers to unite against him. Following the unsuccessful Russian campaign in 1813 to 1814, France faced a formidable coalition of states, including Russia, Great Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Sweden. The Allies defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Leipzig in October 1813, forcing the French troops to withdraw to their own borders. In the spring of 1814, coalition forces entered Paris, and Napoleon was compelled to abdicate his throne and go into exile on the island of Elba. However, Napoleon's story was not yet over. In the spring of 1815, he returned to France and managed to restore his authority for 100 days. This was made possible by his immense popularity among the populace and the army. But the European powers quickly mobilized against him. And on June 18th, 1815, Napoleon suffered his final defeat at the renowned Battle of Waterloo against the combined forces of Great Britain and Prussia. After his defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon was definitively deposed and exiled to the remote island of St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean, where he spent the remainder of his life and died on May 5th, 1821. Despite his defeat and exile, Napoleon left behind an immense legacy, the significance of which cannot be overstated. His civil code became the basis of legislation not only for France, but also for many other countries in Europe and around the world. The educational system he established, the centralized state administration, and the modern military institutions continue to serve as models for many states today. The most crucial aspect of Napoleon's legacy is his influence on development. The Napoleonic Wars shattered the old feudal order and awakened the national consciousness of various peoples, leading to the formation of modern nation-states and becoming the foundation for many future political movements. Moreover, through Napoleon's conquests, the ideas of the French Revolution spread throughout Europe, transforming people's perceptions of human rights and freedoms, popular sovereignty, and governmental structures. The profound impact of his era fundamentally reshaped 19th century European politics, sparking widespread uprisings and transformative reforms. Napoleon's persona also deeply embedded itself within global culture, becoming an icon of brilliant military strategy and exceptional statesmanship. His life story and influence ignited the imaginations of countless creators worldwide. Following Napoleon's ultimate defeat in 1815, Europe sought to re-establish its former stability and order, which had been disrupted by revolutionary fervor and years of conflict. To this end, the Bourbon dynasty was reinstated in France, with Louis XVIII, the younger brother of the executed Louis XVI, ascending to the throne. The period from 1814 to 1824, under Louis XVIII's rule, became known historically as the Restoration era. Despite the return of the old monarchy, France could not entirely discard the advancements born from the Revolution and Napoleon's reforms. The new king was compelled to accept a constitutional charter that safeguarded fundamental civil liberties and preserved certain aspects of civic equality. However, noble titles and privileges were reintroduced, and the Catholic Church's societal influence was reinforced. In 1824, Louis XVIII was succeeded by his younger brother, Charles X, a monarch far less inclined toward compromise and liberal reforms. He openly aimed to revert the nation to its prior order, ruthlessly suppressing dissent, intensifying censorship, and seeking to revoke revolutionary achievements. Charles X's policies ignited intense discontent among the French populace, who had grown accustomed to a degree of liberty and equality. Rising societal tensions culminated in the summer of 1830. Charles IX's attempt to dissolve the Chamber of Deputies, curtail press freedom, and alter electoral laws triggered an insurrection known as the July Revolution. Over 3 days, from the 27th to the 29th of July, 1830, Parisians erected barricades and engaged in street battles with government forces. The revolution resulted in Charles X's abdication and forced exile. Nevertheless, the July Revolution did not usher in a republic. Instead, Louis-Philippe of Orléans, a member of a cadet branch of the Bourbon dynasty, ascended to power. Louis-Philippe was proclaimed King of the French, rather than King of France, signifying a novel approach to monarchy. His authority was now derived from the people, not divine right. The reign of Louis-Philippe from 1830 to 1848 is recognized as the July Monarchy. This era was characterized by relative liberalism and significant growth in capitalism, commerce, and industry within France. However, the new monarchy faced escalating social inequalities and economic challenges, which became particularly acute during the crisis years of the 1840s. Louis-Philippe gradually lost popularity. While the upper bourgeoisie supported his policies, laborers and the impoverished, grappling with low wages, unemployment, and harsh living conditions, experienced growing disillusionment. Intellectuals also voiced their dissatisfaction, demanding broader political freedoms and societal democratization. In February of 1848, France erupted in revolution once more, this time permanently ousting the monarchy. Beginning as a protest against the restriction of political freedoms, the uprising rapidly transformed into a widespread revolution. Louis-Philippe abdicated and fled to Great Britain, and France proclaimed the Second Republic. The Second Republic period, from 1848 to 1852, proved pivotal for France's subsequent political trajectory. For the first time in many years, universal male suffrage was implemented, enabling millions of Frenchmen to participate in elections. The Second Republic also attempted to address social issues by establishing national workshops to combat unemployment and enacting reforms aimed at improving the lives of the working class. However, the Republic encountered significant obstacles. The national workshops proved ineffective, creating substantial financial strain and provoking widespread unrest in June of 1848, which the army suppressed with considerable difficulty and heavy casualties. Social unrest and political instability once again fueled authoritarian sentiments. In December of 1848, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, was elected president of the Republic. He enjoyed immense public favor due to his name and promises of stability and prosperity. However, Louis Napoleon swiftly demonstrated that his true ambition was absolute personal power, not the Republic. In 1851, he orchestrated a coup d'etat, declared himself president for life, and a year later, in 1852, proclaimed himself Emperor Napoleon III, marking the end of the Second Republic. Following Louis Napoleon Bonaparte's declaration of himself as Emperor Napoleon III in 1852, a new chapter in French history commenced, known as the Second Empire. Napoleon III's reign was marked by both progress and controversy, leaving an indelible mark on France, particularly through the ambitious urban renewal projects in Paris that fundamentally altered the city's appearance. Napoleon III envisioned himself not merely as a political leader, but as a grand urban planner, striving to transform Paris into an exemplary city, a symbol of his empire's prosperity and might. To this end, he appointed Baron Haussmann, a talented and dynamic administrator, as prefect of Paris, tasking him with the complete reconstruction of the French capital. This Parisian reconstruction, historically known as Haussmannization, became one of the most extensive urban development undertakings in European history. Baron Haussmann decisively demolished old, narrow streets and neighborhoods, replacing them with the wide avenues, boulevards, and squares renowned globally today. He designed the celebrated grand boulevards, the Champs-Élysées, and magnificent plazas that have become Parisian landmarks. Expansive parks and gardens, such as the Bois de Boulogne and Parc Monceau, were also created, providing the city with vital, green spaces and air. Beyond aesthetic objectives, the Parisian reconstruction held significant political importance. The broad avenues facilitated greater control over the city, making traditional uprisings in confined streets, so characteristic of past revolutions, virtually impossible. Sanitation was improved, with the construction of modern sewage and water supply systems, significantly enhancing urban dwellers' quality of life and reducing the spread of epidemics. Concurrently with the capital's transformation, France underwent extensive modernization. The emperor championed industrial development, railway expansion, and the growth of banking, contributing to the nation's transition into a leading industrial power. Paris during the Second Empire emerged as a vibrant cultural and economic hub for Europe, attracting artists, writers, entrepreneurs, and aristocrats from across the continent. However, the Second Empire's economic and cultural successes were juxtaposed with internal challenges and foreign policy setbacks. The most significant catastrophe for Napoleon III was the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871, a turning point in France's fortunes. Napoleon III sought to bolster his authority and the empire's prestige through a victory over Prussia, a rapidly ascending power under Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. Yet, the French were woefully unprepared for the conflict. Their army was poorly organized and inadequately equipped, and the command made numerous critical errors. The decisive moment of the war was the defeat of the French army and the capture of Napoleon III himself at the Battle of Sedan on September 2nd, 1870. This defeat plunged France into a profound crisis. The fall of the empire was declared in Paris, and a republic was proclaimed. Meanwhile, Prussian forces encircled Paris, initiating a siege that lasted several months, causing immense suffering to the civilian population. In January of 1871, the German Empire was proclaimed within the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, a symbolic act of French humiliation. France was compelled to sign a harsh peace treaty, ceding Alsace and Lorraine and paying substantial reparations. However, Parisians refused to accept defeat. In the spring of 1871, an uprising erupted in Paris, historically known as the Paris Commune. The Commune represented the world's first instance of revolutionary working-class governance, enacting radical social reforms, introducing worker self-management, free education, the separation of church and state, and equal rights for men and women. The Commune endured for 72 days before being brutally suppressed by government forces in May of 1871. an event remembered as the Bloody Week. Tens of thousands of communards perished. Many were executed or sent to penal colonies. Despite the ferocity of its suppression, the Commune's ideals exerted a profound influence on the development of socialist and labor movements globally. Following the Commune's suppression, the Third Republic was definitively established. Initially intended as a provisional regime, the Third Republic endured far longer than any of its predecessors, from 1870 to 1940. The Republic ushered in a period of relative stability and democratic reforms, fostering the growth of parliamentarianism and civil liberties. After the tumultuous events of the latter half of the 19th century, France entered a period later poetically termed the Belle Époque. This era encompassed the concluding decades of the 19th century and the early 20th century, culminating with the outbreak of the First World War. The Belle Époque was a time of remarkable cultural flourishing, technological advancement, and an optimistic outlook towards the future, with Paris solidifying its position as Europe's acknowledged cultural capital. Parisian World's Fairs, held in 1889 and 1900, served as particular symbols of the Belle Époque. These monumental events drew millions of visitors from around the globe, showcasing the scientific, technological, and cultural achievements of the period. It was for the 1889 exhibition that the iconic Eiffel Tower was constructed, originally conceived by engineer Gustave Eiffel as a temporary structure. Despite initial criticism and public opposition, the tower became an emblem not only of Paris, but also of the era's progress and modernization. The 1900 Paris Exposition was one of the largest world fairs, featuring cutting-edge innovations from electricity to the nascent automobile and cinema industries. It was here that the general public first witnessed the films of the Lumiere brothers, heralding a new era in art and entertainment. The Belle Époque also witnessed a vibrant surge in Parisian cultural life. The city experienced an extraordinary boom in literature, painting, music, and theater. Cafes and literary salons in Montmartre and the Latin Quarter became gathering places for artists and intellectuals such as Pablo Picasso, Amedeo Modigliani, Henri Matisse, and the writer Marcel Proust. The French capital became a magnet for creative minds from all over the world, and new styles and movements such as Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Art Nouveau, and Cubism took root. Theaters and cabarets featured stars like Sarah Bernhardt, while the renowned Moulin Rouge symbolized Parisian nightlife and bohemian culture. However, the vibrant and seemingly carefree Belle Époque drew to a close in 1914 with the onset of the First World War. France, alongside Great Britain and Russia, found itself at the epicenter of the conflict, opposing Germany and Austria-Hungary. For France, this war represented not only a severe trial, but also a tragic chapter in its history. The most brutal and devastating battles of World War I unfolded on French soil. The Western Front, traversing French territory, devolved into a theater of relentless trench warfare, characterized by endless trenches, artillery bombardments, and chemical attacks. The Battle of Verdun, lasting nearly the entirety of 1916, stands as one of the most horrific engagements. Verdun became a symbol of the tenacity and courage of French soldiers who withstood the formidable German onslaught. Casualties on both sides were staggering, exceeding 700,000 killed and wounded. Yet, Verdun held firm, embodying the indomitable spirit of the French people. France played a crucial role in the Allied victory. Despite immense losses and devastation, the French army demonstrated exceptional resilience and heroism. Marshals and generals like Joseph Joffre, Ferdinand Foch, and Philippe Pétain became national heroes and emblems of resistance. France also made significant contributions to diplomatic efforts and the unification of the Allied powers. Paris served as a focal point for Allied strategy, with French diplomats actively working to forge an anti-German coalition and to draw the United States into the war, profoundly influencing the conflict's outcome. Following America's entry into the war in 1917, an Allied victory became virtually assured. The First World War concluded with the signing of the Armistice of Compiègne on November 11, 1918, marking Germany's defeat and the Allies' triumph. The subsequent peace treaty was signed at Versailles in 1919, underscoring France's pivotal role in the post-war European order. Despite its victory, the war's repercussions for France were severe. The nation suffered approximately 1.5 million military casualties, vast regions were laid waste, and the economy faced a dire crisis. These consequences left a deep imprint on the collective memory of the French people and contributed to new social and political tensions during the interwar period. Following the conclusion of the First World War, France found itself in a precarious position. While victory bestowed prestige and the status of a major power, the nation grappled with significant economic, political, and social challenges. During the interwar years, from 1918 to 1939, France experienced both cultural efflorescence and a profound economic downturn. In the immediate post-war years, French society sought to escape the horrors of the front lines, manifesting in a resurgence of cultural and social engagement, famously dubbed the Roaring Twenties. Paris once again became a nexus for artists, writers, and intellectuals from across the globe. Literary cafes in Montparnasse and Saint-Germain-des-Prés hosted luminaries such as Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, and James Joyce. Surrealism and Dadaism flourished, with the works of Salvador Dalí, André Breton, and Marcel Duchamp becoming iconic. Cinema and music also underwent a period of innovation and popularity. French cinema produced geniuses like Jean Renoir and Marcel Carné, while cabaret performers like Josephine Baker and Maurice Chevalier became symbols of Parisian nightlife. Fashion also evolved during this period, epitomized by the iconic Coco Chanel, who revolutionized concepts of feminine style and elegance. However, alongside this cultural upswing, the interwar years were marred by severe economic difficulties. France had incurred immense human and material losses during World War I, with many northern regions left in ruins. Inflation, the challenging task of post-war reconstruction, and subsequently, the global economic crisis of the late 20s and early 30s, triggered by the Wall Street crash of 1929, plunged France into a deep economic slump, marked by unemployment, social unrest, and rising political radicalism. Politically, France also endured a period of instability, with frequent government changes and fragmented feuding political parties. Extreme right and left-wing movements gained particular strength, leading to street confrontations in Paris and other major cities. On the eve of the Second World War, the nation found itself divided and weakened by internal discord. The commencement of World War II in 1939 presented France with another grievous ordeal. In May of 1940, German forces breached French defenses, and by June, France was compelled to sign a capitulation. The country was divided into a northern zone, occupied by German troops, and a nominally independent state in the south, with its capital in Vichy. The Vichy regime was led by Marshal Philippe Pétain, a World War I hero held in high esteem by a segment of the population. However, this regime soon revealed its true nature, collaborating with the Nazis, implementing anti-Semitic policies, and participating in the deportation of Jews and the repression of political adversaries. The Vichy government renounced Republican ideals, replacing the motto liberty, equality, fraternity with work, family, fatherland. Despite the occupation and the collaboration of some French authorities with Germany, a widespread and diverse resistance movement rapidly emerged within France. Initially, these were fragmented groups and individuals engaged in sabotage of German operations, clandestine newspaper publication, and aiding Jews and political refugees. Soon, the resistance became more organized, coalescing around General Charles de Gaulle, who from London led an active struggle against the German occupation and the Vichy regime. De Gaulle became the symbol of free France, inspiring the French people to fight and maintain faith in victory. Under his leadership, military units were formed to fight alongside the Allies, while sabotage, partisan actions, and intelligence operations were organized within France. The French resistance played a crucial role in the nation's liberation, assisting Allied forces during the Normandy landings and subsequent advance. The liberation of Paris in August of 1944 marked the culmination of the resistance struggle and symbolized the restoration of French dignity. Following the capital's liberation, the process of rebuilding the French state commenced, with Charles de Gaulle playing a pivotal role as the leader of the provisional government. After the end of the Second World War, France faced a dire situation, with the country devastated, its economy crippled, and its society fractured. It was at this juncture that Charles de Gaulle, the hero of the French resistance, re-emerged to unite the nation in its fight against occupation. His persona and political vision profoundly influenced France's development in the latter half of the 20th century. Following the liberation of Paris in August of 1944, de Gaulle headed the provisional government, which embarked on the task of restoring the country and its political institutions. He enjoyed immense popularity, but could not prevent the resurgence of the traditional French parliamentary system, which he considered outdated and inefficient. Disillusioned by political disagreements and parliamentary conflicts, de Gaulle resigned in January of 1946, paving the way for the establishment of the Fourth Republic. The Constitution of the Fourth Republic, adopted in 1946, effectively reinstated parliamentary democracy, reminiscent of the Third Republic. However, the new system proved exceedingly unstable, with governments constantly changing, plagued by internal divisions, and unable to effectively address the nation's pressing problems. Over the 12 years of the Fourth Republic's existence, more than 20 governments came and went, clearly illustrating its inability to provide stable leadership. The primary challenges of this period included economic recovery, decolonization, and the protracted Algerian War. The colonial question proved particularly divisive, creating a deep rift within society and political circles. The Algerian War, commencing in 1954, erupted into a full-blown political crisis that the Fourth Republic could not resolve. The French army colonists and nationalists pursued conflicting objectives, while French society was engulfed by protests and profound divisions. In 1958, the crisis reached its apex, threatening to escalate into civil war. It was at this critical juncture that Charles de Gaulle returned to power, perceived as the sole figure capable of guiding the country out of the crisis and restoring stability. Parliament granted de Gaulle emergency powers and tasked him with drafting a new constitution, thus giving birth to the Fifth Republic. The genesis of France's current governmental structure, the Fifth Republic, was authored and proclaimed by Charles de Gaulle himself. Ratified by a national plebiscite on September 28, 1958, this constitution stands as the general's most enduring political legacy. It instituted a presidential system, substantially augmenting the head of state's authority. The president, now directly elected by the populace, was vested with the power to appoint the prime minister, dissolve the National Assembly, and call for referendums. Charles de Gaulle assumed the mantle of the Fifth Republic's inaugural president, serving from 1959 to 1969. During his tenure, he successfully stabilized the nation's political landscape, bolstered France's standing on the global stage, resolved the contentious Algerian crisis by granting Algeria independence in 1962, and spearheaded a series of pivotal economic and social advancements. It was under de Gaulle's leadership that France emerged as a nuclear power, significantly enhanced its defense capabilities, and reclaimed its status as a major international actor. However, by the late 1960s, his presidency faced considerable internal challenges, most notably the widespread student and labor demonstrations of May 1968. These seismic events shook the country, highlighting profound societal shifts. While the protests were ultimately suppressed, they eroded de Gaulle's authority. In April 1969, he voluntarily stepped down following a referendum defeat concerning administrative reform. Nevertheless, the Fifth Republic, conceived by de Gaulle, demonstrated remarkable resilience and effectiveness, becoming the longest-lasting political framework in France since the Revolution. The Constitution of the Fifth Republic continues to shape the nation's political life today, harmonizing the stability of presidential leadership with democratic parliamentary principles. Consequently, the eras of the Fourth and Fifth Republics represent a significant and complex chapter in French history, marked by both instability and crisis, as well as profound reforms and foreign policy triumphs. The pivotal role of Charles de Gaulle during this period cannot be overstated. His personal fortitude, unwavering resolve, and political vision enabled France to surmount severe trials, establish a stable political order, and reassert its rightful place among the world's preeminent nations. Following Charles de Gaulle's departure from the political arena, France entered a phase of stable governance under the Fifth Republic, characterized by a succession of distinguished presidents, each with a distinct leadership style. Every president contributed to the evolution of modern France, confronting unique challenges and fulfilling specific mandates. François Mitterrand, a socialist, became the first president of that political stripe, elected in 1981 and serving until 1995. His election was a transformative political event for France, marking the return to power of a left-leaning coalition led by the Socialist Party for the first time in decades. Mitterrand's presidency was distinguished by far-reaching social reforms, including an increase in the minimum wage, expanded social welfare programs, and the nationalization of key industries. However, he soon encountered economic headwinds that necessitated a moderation of his initial left-leaning agenda in favor of more market-oriented policies. In foreign affairs, Mitterrand was a fervent advocate for European integration, laying the groundwork for deeper cooperation among European nations. In 1995, Jacques Chirac was elected President of France, holding office until 2007. Chirac embodied the traits of a charismatic and pragmatic conservative statesman of Gaullist persuasion. During his presidency, compulsory military service was abolished, and France transitioned to a professional army, a significant step in modernizing its armed forces. Chirac's tenure also notably included his strong opposition to the United States invasion of Iraq in 2003, a stance that solidified France's independent foreign policy posture. Despite enjoying considerable popularity in his initial years, Chirac's second term was overshadowed by social unrest and growing public discontent. Nicolas Sarkozy succeeded Chirac, serving as president from 2007 to 2012. His ascent symbolized a generational shift in French politics. Sarkozy, known for his energetic and ambitious approach, departed from traditional political norms and actively pursued liberal economic reforms aimed at enhancing France's competitiveness. Nevertheless, his presidency coincided with the global financial crisis of 2008, which had a profound impact on the economy and social fabric. Sarkozy's foreign policy was dynamic and ambitious, particularly concerning Europe and relations with the United States. However, his personal style and character frequently drew criticism from the French public. François Hollande, a socialist, followed Sarkozy, holding the presidency from 2012 to 2017. Hollande was elected on a platform promising to address economic challenges and promote social justice. However, amidst an ongoing economic crisis, his presidency was fraught with significant difficulties. Under Hollande's leadership, France endured a series of devastating terrorist attacks, including the tragic events at the Charlie Hebdo offices and the coordinated assaults in Paris in November 2015. Hollande's presidency was marked by widespread public disappointment and a decline in his approval ratings, ultimately leading him to forego a second term. In 2017, the young and dynamic Emmanuel Macron, founder of the En Marche movement, was elected President of France. His election heralded a fundamentally new approach to politics. Macron positioned himself as a centrist, transcending traditional left-right political divisions. He proactively initiated economic reforms, targeting labor market liberalization and pension system modernization. However, his reform agenda met with considerable resistance, sparking large-scale protests, most notably the Yellow Vest movement in 2018-219. Despite these challenges, Macron managed to retain power and continue his reform efforts, while also maintaining an active role in international affairs, advocating for European unity and the strengthening of the European Union. Thus, the presidencies of Mitterrand, Chirac, Sarkozy, Hollande, and Macron span several decades of contemporary French history, showcasing a diverse range of governance approaches. Each leader made substantial contributions to France's development, navigated formidable internal and external challenges, and left behind a unique political legacy. Modern France continues its trajectory of modernization and democratic evolution, preserving its significant global role and striving to address complex domestic issues such as social inequality, migrant integration, and economic adaptation to the realities of the 21st century. Modern France, as it entered the 21st century, represents a nation that simultaneously cherishes its historical heritage and endeavors to successfully navigate the intricate challenges of a globalized world. A nation founded on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity now confronts new realities: multiculturalism, economic transformations, social tensions, and a vital role within the European Union. One of the foremost challenges facing contemporary France is multiculturalism, intrinsically linked to its colonial past and post-colonial migration patterns. Following the Second World War, and particularly after the Algerian War of Independence from 1954 to 1962, France welcomed millions of immigrants from its former colonies in North Africa, West Africa, and the Middle East. These immigrants and their descendants have significantly altered the nation's demographic profile. Today, approximately 6 million French residents have Muslim heritage, making France home to the largest Muslim population in Western Europe. These migratory flows have infused French society with a wealth of new cultural elements, from cuisine to music and cinema. However, the integration process has proven to be complex and multifaceted. On one hand, France takes pride in its republican model, founded on the principles of laïcité, the secular nature of the state, and the equality of all citizens regardless of their religion or ethnic background. On the other hand, the country grapples with recurrent conflicts stemming from issues of identity and integration. The extensive urban riots in the Parisian suburbs and other cities in 2005, ignited by social grievances and discrimination, serve as stark manifestations of these societal contradictions. Furthermore, France has been one of the countries most severely impacted by terrorism in recent decades. A series of brutal attacks, including the assault on the Charlie Hebdo magazine offices in January 2015, the tragic events at the Bataclan Concert Hall, and across Paris on November 13th of the same year, and the attack in Nice in 2016, have exposed the profound vulnerabilities of French society to the radicalization of certain segments of its youth. These events have spurred widespread public discourse on security, human rights, and the boundaries of religious freedom. France's economy remains one of the most robust in Europe and globally. The nation is a leading exporter of goods and services, a pioneer in the aerospace industry with companies like Airbus, and a major player in automotive manufacturing, with brands such as Renault and Peugeot, as well as in pharmaceuticals and luxury goods. Paris continues to be recognized as the world's fashion and haute cuisine capital, with firms like LVMH and Chanel holding dominant positions in the global market. However, France's economic achievements are tempered by significant challenges. High unemployment rates, particularly among young people and residents of disadvantaged suburbs, have been a persistent problem for many years. Stringent labor laws, high taxation, and relatively slow progress in economic reforms regularly fuel social protests and strikes. For instance, in 2018 and 2019, the country experienced powerful Yellow Vest demonstrations, which initially erupted in response to increased fuel prices, but quickly evolved into an expression of broader discontent over social inequality, declining living standards, and government policies. France also faces considerable challenges concerning its pension system and social welfare programs. President Emmanuel Macron's attempts to enact pension reform have triggered widespread protests and strikes in 2019 and 2023, underscoring the depth of societal divisions within the nation. In its foreign policy, France remains a crucial global player, serving as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and a leading member of NATO and the European Union. France traditionally occupies a distinct position within the EU, advocating for deep integration while reserving its prerogative for independent action. President Macron actively promotes the concept of European strategic autonomy and the strengthening of a common European defense and security policy. France plays an active role in military and humanitarian operations, particularly in Africa, where it historically maintains significant influence. It participates in counter-terrorism operations in the Sahel region and serves as a key partner to numerous African nations. Concurrently, France consistently champions the fight against climate change and the implementation of the Paris Agreement, adopted at the United Nations Climate Change Conference held in Paris in 2015.